questions on things as well. So I might start with just some really basic principles on riveting. So if you don't know what riveting is, basically riveting is this cold joining technique where you can join two pieces of metal together. Typically they are two flat pieces of metal, however that's not like a rule. Like you can certainly join pieces of metal that are curved. We just have a few different considerations when we need to do that. So but typically joining two flat sheets together, and the way that we rivet is by deciding where we want the rivet, drilling a hole, and then putting a piece of wire into that hole, which is exactly the same diameter as the hole, okay? And then we just allow a small amount of metal to protrude either side, and we spread that metal, generally using a hammer, so that it kind of stretches out and sandwiches the metal pieces together. And it's a very strong way of joining things together. So it's not to say that riveting has any less structural integrity than, say, soldering, like a hot draining technique. The Story Bridge is kind of essentially held together with rivets. So, you know, you can use these as long as you're sensible in your placement of the rivets, the thickness and size of the rivets. You will certainly get a very strong and good join. Okay, so I'm going to make an Easter egg pendant or charm today. I've just used two pieces of scrap metal that I found, but this one had a texture in it from the last demo that I did here when we did metal surfaces. So I just thought I'd reuse my Christmas texture on my Easter texture. I really enjoy like themed holidays, so I think the next one I'm doing is Halloween. If you want to come along, I don't know, we're doing like spooky saw piercing or something, I don't know, but we'll see what happens. So I've already cut out this back piece with some tabs on it for when I show you tab setting a little bit later on, but first I'm going to drill a hole for doing our first rivet. And I'm not going to do a standard rivet first, which would probably make sense. I'm actually going to do a tube rivet, okay? So tube rivets are where instead of using wire, solid wire, as our riveting material, we use tubing, okay? And we flare the edges of that tubing to sort of create that spread of metal that sandwiches the pieces together. So what I've done is I've marked on my metal, on my top piece, where it is that I want to put my rivet. And it's not a bad idea when you're thinking about doing a piece with multiple rivets in it to treat your top piece like a template. Your top piece is usually your smaller piece, so even if it's going to go on the bottom, I'm just going to call it a top piece for today. And to kind of lay it out like a template, so you could drill all of your holes for your top piece, or at least drill pilot holes for where you want all of your rivets to go. So I've put one mark here where I want my tube rivet to go, but I'm also going to be doing a ball rivet, so I might do the ball rivet here. So I'm going to put a little mark where I want my ball rivet to go. I also need to do a standard rivet just for demonstration purposes, so I might just put that here.
What was the ball rivet?
So a ball rivet is where we use balled wire to create the rivet head. So I might just say things now, some terminology. Please ask me the questions, but I'll probably just go into it in more detail later. But yeah, essentially it's just using wire that we've balled the end of. I've got my little piece of paper so I don't forget all the rivets that we're doing.
Do you know what typo is?
Yes, I think that's all the rivets that we're going to do on this one, and we're going to do a spacer rivet a little bit later on a separate piece. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do before I drill my holes is center punch
bank on the corner
onto that piece, and that is
down Queen Street.
Here's the first piece of equipment that I didn't bring. This happens in all my demos. I just need to ask Andrew, could I have a center punch, please? Thank you.
And so walk down that little alley and go up.
I did bring this lovely little chasing tool, which I'm going to use to help us do our tube rivet. But I don't want to use that as my center punch. So if you were thinking, there's that center punch right in front of you, Claire, it looks like a center punch, but that isn't.
Can I pass it around?
Absolutely. You can. I've got the two. I'll just pass them both around. So I've got a two chasing tools here, which I'm not using for chasing, but are very, very handy for some of the techniques I'm going to show you today. So that one that is like a conical shape, I'm going to use for spreading the rivet head. The one that is a flat shape, I use because I really need to give my doming block a good polish. And you might find that when your doming block is starting to tarnish, it's a little bit hard to get your dome out. So if you ever have that trouble, or sometimes you've just jammed it in really hard and you need to get it out, that works a little bit like, I don't know, not quite like a chisel, but you just pop it on there and tap it a few times and it just pops it right out. But I'll show you that later. Now, did that just get put in front of me? Oh, that's it. Ooh, it's one of these ones. Okay, so these ones are like, they're self-punching, are they called? Center
Is there any
punches?
chance you can move that up?
Oh, I'm
here?
so sorry, yes. Just being really lazy there and not getting off my chair. Okay, so a traditional center punch would just work. Let's just pretend this was one, and we'd pop it on and we just give it a tap with a hammer. And these ones, which I don't use regularly, so just forgive me if I do a bad job, you just push down. No, how do you do it? More till it clicks. Oh, yeah, so that. Snazzy. Don't even need a hammer. There we go. Okay, so I've center punched those. Now, the two wires that I have here, for my ball rivet, I have a 1.2 millimeter diameter wire. For my standard rivet, I have a 1.5 millimeter diameter wire, and my tubing is 2.4 millimeters in diameter, okay? So they all need different sized holes drilled into them. I certainly can. My ball rivet is 1.2, my standard rivet is 1.5, and my tube rivet is 2.4. Now, that is not to say that those are the only sizes you can use for these rivets. That's just what I'm using. So basically I'm telling you that because I have here specifically the sizes of drill bits that I need to drill those holes. So I have a little 1.2 drill bit for that guy, a 1.5 drill bit for that guy, and I don't have a 2.4 mil drill bit for this guy, but I'll go into that, what I'm using momentarily. So, is there a pair of safety glasses for this drill? It's just going to be happening all day. I wouldn't actually bother sitting down, Andrew. I'd just be standing here waiting for all the things that I'm going to need.
Yeah.
So you basically use the same drill bit size as...
Exactly, as the wire. So you must have, they must, because obviously if it's any smaller, your wire, if you drill bit smaller, the wire's not going to fit in. But if it's bigger, it's going to be loose and it'll kind of, instead of, like it's hard to get it to spread enough, thank you, to cover that. But also, usually it'll just sort of knock over. Thank you very much. Okay, safety glasses. Really important to always use safety glasses when you are drilling holes. So what I'm going to do is use my 1.2 mil drill bit to just drill pilot holes for each of these, except obviously for my ball rivet, which needs to be 1.2, so it's not a pilot hole. Now just turn that up. Ooh, how do I put it on foot? Or is it only hand? Is this a hand one? Thank you. That's exciting.
Is that on and off here?
Oh, I think it's just only hand. That's okay. So I'm just gonna drill those holes. This is only aluminium. It's very soft. It'll be quite quick. And okay. Very nice. So I've drilled out those little pilot holes. Now, what I didn't bring with me today that would have been handy, but just as a little tool that you guys can make for yourself really easily, is a tool that's called a deburrer. And if you go to uni, you'll be really familiar with that. There might be like another name for it as well. But essentially, it's just a large drill bit. So maybe you could grab like a 4 or 5 or 6 mil, even just Bunnings kind of style drill bit, pop it in some kind of a handle. So you could put a little timber handle over if you ever use that. What's that grey stuff that you put in hot water? That what is it? Thermolock. Yeah, yes. And there's like other various brands of that. Make a handle for it, and then you know when you get a little burr on the back after you drilled, you just use that larger drill bit and just twist it around, and that'll just remove the burr. Now I have a larger drill bit here, which I'm just using, and that will work quite well. But obviously if you have a big like 4 or 5 mil drill bit, it'll do any size hole that you're drilling, whereas this is a 2 mil drill bit and I don't have a bigger one. Oops. That's alright. I always think I'm going to have everything for these demos. Now, you certainly could drill these all out to the correct sizes now, but what I like to do is just drill them all out to a pilot hole, and then I'm going to do my first rivet, and then I can actually drill straight through that hole into the second piece of metal, and this is going to act a little bit like a center punch. It's essentially just a guide for it, okay? So it doesn't have to be the exactly right size, because you know your larger drill bit's going to drill it out, but that will ensure that you do it in the right spot. Whereas once you've riveted one, it's a bit awkward to go in and like center punch something that might have multiple layers, and I don't know, depending on what those layers are, like you might be using this to rivet timber or plastics or ceramics. You know, if those are delicate materials, you don't want to risk center punching with a hammer and breaking or damaging the other materials.
So if all those rivets were going to be the same size, would you do the same thing?
Yeah, so I would just drill them all out with 1.2, and that's fine. Okay. So I'm going to choose. Actually, I will start with the standard. Let's go easy to hard. I feel like that's probably a better way to do it. Once I've got my top piece as a template, I'm going to place that on top, okay, and I'm happy that that's lined up exactly where I want it. I'm just going to take a Sharpie and put a little mark through the hole that I've drilled onto my bottom piece, and that'll be exactly where I want it, okay? Now if you drill a hole which is too small for a Sharpie to go through, I usually find if it's any smaller than 1 mil, you can't get, even the really skinny ones won't go in. Just use the drill bit that you drilled the hole with and just go in and scratch a little bit, and you'll see that mark on the surface underneath. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and center punch. So you'll notice that I'm just doing one hole on this bottom piece. I'm not lining it all up, because if no matter how tight I hold that, and then no matter how careful I am where I center punch and how careful I am when I'm drilling, it's pretty much impossible to not be fractionally off. And if you are just, 0.01 of a millimeter in the wrong position, you won't get that wire through. So I'm going to do one hole, do one rivet, so I know that that's in the right position, and then I can do a second rivet, okay? And then once I've got 2 rivets in, if you had 50 rivets on here, once 2 are in, you could drill all of those future rivets out, because it's not going to go anywhere. But with one rivet, even with one rivet in there, when we're drilling out our second hole, we'll secure it so that it doesn't shift when we're drilling. Does that kind of make sense? Mm. So just never go ahead and drill like a whole bunch of holes here and a whole bunch of holes on here and just assume that they will match up, because they can shift. Even if you hold this in a ring clamp and drill all your holes out, you might be lucky, but you might be unlucky, so don't take the chance. Okay.
Hello, Australian Jews. Yeah? Which corner of Elizabeth Street?
And actually, what did I just say? I was going to do our standard rivet. So our standard rivet is 1.5. So I'm going to swap out my 1.2 drill bit for my 1.5. And essentially, these are pilot holes. This will make it easier to drill through. Keep wanting to push the thing on the floor. Slow.
Yep. And you see that little kind of arcade? Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So,
that's the clothing shoe.
I've got copper wire here.
Yeah, so go down
Just
the
because that's what I
arcade
happen to have
between
to
the
hand. So you could use
Walk to the
copper
end.
or silver or brass
And
or
then
gold
just
for your
hang
rivets.
a
They're all
bit
going to
left
work
and just go
quite
on
well.
with the red,
You can even, I've seen people use titanium for rivets. It's difficult to get that to spread because it's such a hard
Beautiful.
metal,
Helped.
but it's possible, and you would just be
You were
aware
so
that
close, you were
it
so
could make marks on your little riveting hammer. So you just want to sort of, and your steel
Yes.
block. So be aware if you're going to be
Places,
using
and you wanna hang
materials
that,
that aren't
so you
nice
wanna
and
go
soft,
Yeah.
that they could cause damage.
Yeah.
But I never say that there are any hard and
Yes.
fast rules for things. Just give it a try, as long as it's your equipment you're trying it on. So I should just be able to sort of wiggle this and get it through, which I have done. If it goes in really easily, just check that you haven't accidentally drilled the wrong size hole, because it should be a little bit of a wiggle to get it in. If you have drilled the wrong size hole, it's not the end of the world, but you just need to then find some wire that's the same size as the hole you drilled, because you're not going to be able to get away with using a smaller size material.
Claire, do you anneal your wire first?
I don't, but typically, because when you buy these wires, they come from the suppliers half hard, so they're usually soft enough to thank you, Rivet. Yes, this is the brain farts that are going to start to happen. Words will just escape me. So now we're going to cut this to a smaller size. So there are a few ways to do that. You can do the Clare way, which is the lazy way. So you would use a pair of flush cutters. So some flush cutters will cut one side, they're like snips, but they'll cut your metal flat on one side. So I would just cut it flat on this side, cut it flat on that side to about the size that I wanted, and that's nice and quick and easy. If you are of a more pedantic nature, which is actually very good on you, that will set you in good stead for jewellery, you can calculate exactly how much material you need, and then use chenier cutters, so use a vise and a saw to cut that, and you will then also get flat ends and have like no metal wastage and get everything totally perfect. So, but both will work, I promise. So how much do you need sticking out either side? A good rule of thumb is 50 to 75% of the diameter of the metal protruding from either side, okay? So, a bit more than half the size of your wire. So if you've got 2mm wire, about 1 to 1.5 mil sticking out. If you've got 1mm wire, 0.5 to 0.8-ish, millimeters sticking out either side. So it's not a lot. If you're eyeballing it, just a little bit. Like, I know that's really vague, but most of the time with the sizes we're using, about a millimeter, you just need a little bit. If you've got too much sticking out, if it's too long, you'll know, because it'll just bend over. Yeah. And it will look terrible, and it's not actually a rivet or doing anything, so you have to start again. If you don't have enough material, it'll look flat and flush with your metal. You won't have anything raised up. You haven't used enough, okay? So, once you do a couple, you'll get a really good feel for it. So,
is it fine if you're doing a graduating thing and you want them to actually move? Do you do a bigger hole so that each piece, or
no? So if you I don't know if I totally understand, but if you mean movement, like you want it to spin or something like that?
No,
or...
if you're doing, say, a graduating piece and you're putting, one piece here and then another piece here and another piece here, and you didn't actually want them tight. So you just do a little bit bigger hole?
No, so probably, if I'm understanding correctly, that might be what we're going to do later when we do a spacer rivet and we have a gap in between the sheets of metal that we're wanting to sandwich together. Then we actually are going to use pieces of tubing to kind of separate them out. If you're wanting it to spin, which I'm going to show you when I'm going to make an exciting little egg cup to hold a tiny Easter egg. I don't know, I'm trying to think of Eastery things to do. there are some ways that we can leave a gap to make that loose. But if we have a hole that is bigger than our wire, we're not going to be able to spread the rivet head enough that it will actually hold things. Like it'll just fall off the end, or break away. So possibly, if you're thinking the other way around, where you just want them to be able to move up and down freely, it might be a case where you need to actually solder like a cap or something like that on it. Yeah. Or we have to draw a picture and talk about it, because my brain might not be actually processing that. But yeah, so we will go on and do a little spacer rivet later on. So for right now, if you're like me and didn't bring your flash cutters, oops, or you just only have a pair of just normal like side snips that you might use for solder or something like that, you can use that as well, and then just file it back. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. You don't have to go spend $90 on a pair of flush cutters, or like, I don't know how much a budget pair costs, but a budget $50, I don't know. I'm just making prices up, so don't, if I'm just telling you prices, actually talk to Andrew if you want to buy some. Okay, so what I have cut there is just a little more than I'll need, because I'm going to file it back, because if you have a look, you'll have that sort of pinched end. So I'm just going to get you guys to pass that around, and just hopefully we don't drop the rivet out. But have a look at both sides, because even flush cutters, you'll notice a little line where you cut them. So you kind of have a, you know, that's where you cut, but they've kind of just got this line here just where the metal's been sheared off. And, you know, if you want really particularly beautiful rivet heads, you will go to the effort of just filing that little line out, and then after you've filed it out, you'll sand the top as well. So you don't have to polish it, because you can polish them later if you want, but just to get a really nice head. You're looking to get essentially like a little cylinder of wire inside. And yet likewise, if you cut on a bit of an angle, you'll need to file down, because you really want that cylindrical shape of wire, not no angles or pinches or anything that's going to make it look nasty at the end. I just wanted to know. Sorry about the flash cutters.
Our flash cutters.
Just while it's getting passed around, one other thing to note, when you're doing cold joins, you want like 99% of the work to be done, and your riveting is pretty much your last stage that you're looking at. So, you know, if you're patinaing your metal, or
I've got it.
Good catch.
It just fell out.
I can put it back in. Yes, if you're going to polish your metal, texture your metal, patina your metal, cut your metal, file your metal, sand your metal, any of those steps, they should all be done beforehand, because, you know, you're not going to be able to run this through a roller once it's been riveted, because you'll just squash the rivets, or you know, it's going to be really hard to access the sides to file and sand them. So typically, I mean, there's exceptions to every rule. I'm not saying that in every single possible eventuality you must do it last, but 99% of the time you will. Now, if your rivet falls out and you're having trouble putting it back in, or if you have wire that you're having a lot of trouble squeezing in, you can just put it in a pair of pliers, and that usually gives you a little bit more leverage to push things in. Just a pair of flat pliers. Okay. Alright, so everybody had a look at just that really small amount of metal sticking out either side. Thank you. Oh, I keep moving the demo away from the camera. Sorry, people on the camera. The internet. you. Cheers. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is just file the top and the bottom of that rivet head. And it's good, like it's usually pretty handy if you just have it in the thing. But if you don't feel like you have the ability to to file the top of that rivet head without accidentally filing your piece as well, just take it out and hold it in a pair of pliers or in a ring clamp. And you could do this actually on the bench peg. And parallel pliers work really well for holding these also, because you can get quite a good grip. Whoops, found it. It's all good. Okay. Phew. Okay, actually, one little step that I'm going to do before I rivet that, I have these little tabs on here, okay, because I was like, I'll just do one sample for everything, and these little tabs are going to need to be bent up and over as well. So these will be unnecessary tabs because the rivets will actually hold them together, but you could simply use the tabs and no rivets and it would still hold this little guy on top. But it's going to be much easier for me to just start the bending process now while I don't have another piece of metal on top. So what I'm going to do is grab my parallel pliers to bend them up. Now, if you don't know what a tab setting is, essentially, and there might be like other people call them like turtle settings, or there's like other weird names that people have for things, so whatever name you want to call them, but basically it's when you use a single sheet of metal, trace around the object that you wish to set, and then add these little tabs in at strategic points, because obviously it's just like a claw setting, like you need a minimum of 3 to kind of hold things in, but you can do more if you want to be decorative. And these little tabs bend over and sort of clamp onto it. I'm using it with a piece of sheet metal, which is fine, but you can use this with stones or with timber or all sorts of materials that you can't use heat to join together. Okay, so
Claire,
yeah,
sorry, can I ask?
absolutely.
Trying to go through uni,
Yeah.
I had to do a tab setting, and I suddenly realised I had no idea how big to make the tabs. So I made these monster tabs,
Mega tabs.
which were just impossible to manipulate. And I was amazed at just how delicate those tabs
Yeah.
are. And they're fine.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a really good question. Sorry, I'm probably rushing through the tabs a little bit then. So with the metal that we'll start maybe with the thickness of the metal that you want to use for a tab setting. So typically I find that 0.5 to like a maximum of about 0.7 is easy. Okay, so I never would say you can't use thicker metal to do a tab setting. I'm just saying that you're probably making your life difficult. Okay, so the 0.5 to 0.7, you've got a little bit of malleability because of the thinness of that metal. I have found people using aluminium, like 1 mil aluminium, to do it, and you try to bend it and they just snap. So you probably want to do a few samples and experiments and things if you're going to use thicker material. 1 mil brass, you'd have to be really bloody strong to
That's wrong. Well,
bend
I
that
was using
over.
1 mil brass.
Oh no,
and
yeah,
0.7 mil titanium.
yeah. So, and I would just say titanium is probably not a great material for a tab setting. Like copper is beautiful for a tab setting. It's such a soft metal, and silver works quite well. Sterling or fine, they're nice soft metals. But once you start using brass, like aluminium's difficult because it's just that little bit brittler. More brittle. That was terrible English. I'm sorry, just making up words. But Yeah, like titanium or brass. They're stiff. And then in addition to that, there's not just like the thickness of the metal, but the thickness or the width of those tabs. So, you know, it's a bit like wire. Like wire is easy to bend because it's thin, but sheet metal is difficult to bend because it has that width to it. So if you make like a 1 centimeter wide tab, it's going to be pretty hard to push that over. You know, if it was fine silver, you'd probably get away with it, but in brass, it's just a nightmare. So if you make nice little narrow tabs, and of course, like it depends on the size of the thing that you are setting, but you know, I probably wouldn't go too much wider than 2 or 3 mil maximum, just for that ease of, because you think about it, it's going from flat, so not only does it have to push up to 90 degree, then it's got to push all the way over to hold your piece in. And if you're doing sheet, like that's doing a U-turn, right? If you're doing a stone, then it depends on the sort of profile of your bezel. Typically it'll be a bezel, the profile of your stone. So here's a little sample that I'm going to show you later for doing a brooch fitting with a cold join. But you can see that the tabs on there are like 2 mil maximum. So, you know, if you want to get them up and over, you're going to have to do. I'll pass that around so you can have a little look. You can look at the brooch fitting on the back too and kind of have a look and suss out how you can, without any soldering, create brooch fittings.
Claire, just a little tip.
Yeah.
I don't know whether people use this. I've got a pair of flat pliers, the flush ones, and when you're filing your piece off and you want it flat, set it down to where you want it and then just file to your seat and you get it nice and straight.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a great
lot of
tip.
people don't. They try and do it the other way and you get that little bit out.
Yep.
And when you try to join it, you're out that little bit.
Yeah, so that's a brilliant tip, and you're going to make sure you get that nice flat parallel top on it. So I like that, absolutely. So I'm just going to get my parallel pliers and I'm going to start bending these up. I'm not going to obviously push them over because my piece not in there, but I'm going to put them up to 90 degrees. So I'm just coming like right up close to where I've saw pierced that edge. So you don't want to come from back here, because if you come from too far, like to say this is our piece and this is our tab, we don't want it like bending over with a big gap in it. Like you want it to come up, hold your piece in, and then pop over. And really, you know, you got one shot. Like don't be like bending it up and then going, oh, I did that on a funny angle or too far back, and then bending it back down. I mean, if it's the first time you're doing one, just accept your first one's not going to be perfect, and maybe you do have to unbend it and bend it back up. But your wrist, that's when they're going to snap off. So, you know, just to the best of your ability, just bend them up in the one hit.
If you scored a little line, would that weaken them too much?
I avoid scoring them because I'm using quite thin metal already, and then you're thinning out that bend, and we're not, if you were using a metal where you were happy to solder that little score line, so bend them up to 90 degrees and solder it, that would be absolutely fine. I wouldn't worry about it then. But if you're trying to do it 110% cold join, I would just avoid it personally. But it's not to say if you did score it a little bit and bent it up, you're going to get it's definitely going to break. Yeah.
I'm interested in why you chose to put your little
The little tabs. Yeah.
Where you put them, place them here in terms of holding it in. Is it decorative or is it...
So some of it is decorative and some of it is functional. So thank you very much. So what is decorative about it is the fact that over here I've got 2 instead of 1, and that was just a decorative little, you know, structurally you could just have 1 and it would still hold it fine, and I was just like, I don't want to put 1 in the middle of this pretty little channel that's coming there.
Yeah,
I'll pop it to either side. But for the rest, because this is I've kind of got to clamp it here so that it doesn't fall out that side, and I've got to clamp it here so it doesn't fall out that side. if the bare sort of minimum, I could probably have gotten away with, like, it's a 3-sided shape, I could have gotten away with 3, like 1, 2, 3, but just aesthetically, and you know, it's a long shape as well, so having a couple of extra tabs is just going to be a little bit of extra security in that. So
Did you saw this?
I did saw that, yeah. So
and you saw it around your little
yes,
tabs type
yeah.
of
So
thing?
that's all just like hand sawn
sawing,
to sort
yeah.
of get that shape. I don't know anyone yet that's like laser cutting metal. I know there's water jet cutting going on, but I don't think the accuracy is supposed to be particularly good with that. Anyway, once you like just practice a little bit, and you'll be able to like saw pierce that out. So if you can kind of see that now, all those little tabs are just sitting up at a 90-degree angle, and from the back you can see that it pretty much just conforms with the shape of that egg.
And you've used little tabs to actually make that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Okay. So stupidly, what I have done here in bending those tabs up, I should have bent those tabs up to start with, because of course it's just pushed my little egg over. This is why I shouldn't do like every single demo on one piece the day before. But that's okay. So this will be a good time to swap out from using our 1.5 wire to a big one, because, okay, great. Let's pretend I did this mistake on purpose, but I didn't. I just wasn't thinking about it. So when I put those little tabs up, it's pushed this piece of metal slightly. So now these aren't going to line up with where my tabs have kind of been pushed up. So if I was to make this piece again, I'd learn from this mistake and push my tabs over first and then just drill the hole. But stupid Claire didn't think about that.
But if you did the other way around, that would work too, like putting the wire first, riveting, then folding the tabs on.
Yes, it would work as well, but the hard part would be to bend
Making
those
that
tabs,
angle
yeah,
on
get that
the
little
right
square
spot.
angle. Exactly, because what I would essentially, I wouldn't be able to get my pliers in there anymore because there's something else. So you probably could still literally just put it against a bench and rolled it over, and you'd probably get a pretty good result, but you're going to get a really nice crisp result if you can pop those 90-degree angles in your tab first. So don't stress. Hey Andrew, do you have 2mm wire here by any chance? Can I have like 2mm of that? Claire. Why do demos never go smoothly? Because I don't think
Because
about
a
that.
workshop doesn't go
sort of thing we
smoothly.
do at home.
Yeah.
You could think of it in a way that because you've done it, people are really, really aware
Yes,
of course,
exactly.
that sort of thing.
That's right.
So it kind of clicks into your brain.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Why it's so important. Thank you. I like that. That makes me
When
feel
you're
a little
making
bit
something,
better.
when does it ever go smoothly?
There is no? Okay, well, because this is a delightful sample piece, what I'm going to do then is put my tube rivet in the middle, which makes absolutely zero sense, because typically you'd put your tube...
You could just re-drill the two holes.
Do a new hole.
Because
And
it's
then there'll be a
sample.
hole in the middle of it.
It's a sample data.
I'll
It's
just
a
have...
design feature.
I'll have 2 tube rivets.
It's a design feature.
Has the hole moved sort of that way a bit? Can't just twist it back, just...
I
twist
just
it
can't
back.
quite, just because of where those tabs have pushed. Actually, good thing. I'm going to pass that around though, so you just keep passing things around, so you can see how like fractional that little bit of, there's like a little crescent of brass that I can see in there, and no matter like which way I kind of turn this, I can't get it in such a position that there isn't that crescent of brass
Have
there.
you got a pointer, a hardened steel pin that you can push in there? It'll line it up.
Not really, just because that brass is really like acting as a stopper. So I pass it around. Just have a little look at what I'm kind of talking about. I could literally probably just unbend one of those tabs and shift it ever so slightly, and that would allow that. But like truly, it really doesn't matter. Like I don't really care about this final piece being functional.
I've just pushed it.
You've just pushed it. Okay, well, let's see if we can get that piece of copper in. I might need your strong, gentlemanly muscles to push them at the same time, because I think it's just going to be like this thing. But if you can just, yeah, grab the pliers, see how you go. Yeah, anyway, good learning experience if we can't push this in. But
because that's the problem, isn't it? Even if it's just skew with a bit,
it's just a tiny bit, like just that little tiny bit where they're
it's not going to spread nicely, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not even so much it's not going to spread quite nicely. I can't get the wire in because there's just this crescent that's stopping it. Look, probably I could just file it out a little bit and it would probably work. But now I feel like I've told you how you shouldn't do this, so I don't want to go ahead in the demo and be like, just drill it out a little bit bigger.
Have you got a sharp scriber there?
No. Look, honestly, truly, let's just. Okay, it really
I think
doesn't
you've
matter.
got a little burr on the end of your rivet. I can't see without that.
Are you planning to drill a hole into the rivet afterwards?
Have you got
As
your,
well?
your original drill there? Drill bit?
Yeah, like we could just go in and use the drill bit to drill that out, but
It's a bit of a burr there, that's all.
But it's
yeah,
going to make the hole.
it's just going to make the hole bigger if we do it. So
Only a fraction.
honestly, I know like it is just a fraction, but just for the sake of
You should try anyway, because you're going to end up
It's
making
too
it
big for the
too
wire. As soon as
well,
the
we didn't
wire's
have the 2
loose,
mil wire. Was
that's
the only
fine.
problem. Yeah. Okay, look, guys, what I'm going to do. We're just going to make it a tube rivet, okay? It truly doesn't matter. And then we'll use that top one to do the standard rivet. It'll take 2 secs. But what I am going to take this opportunity to do is just set that piece in so we're not having any more sort of issues with things moving about and being a pain in the bum. So if you're just setting like these pieces of metal like this, sometimes you can literally just grab your pliers and push it down. But what you risk doing is putting a big scratch on the back of your piece as you do that. So if you can use a pusher, if you have a pusher floating around from your bezel setting, but even often I'll just use the edge of this, that'll be fine too. You could use a hammer, basically you can use a teaspoon. It's just something that you can use that's not your poor little squished thumb that's going to get a stab mark in the end of it. So just hold this over here. What I'm going to do, see how I'm just coming like so, push that little tab over. Now I'm not pushing it all the way over, a little bit like when we do a bezel setting and we just go like from, 12, 6, 9, 3, work it in like that, and just push these across. Okay, so can you kind of see how these are now holding that firmly in place, but they're not sitting flat down? So if this was a like a stone or something with a concave surface, it doesn't have to be a stone. Maybe you put a piece of domed aluminium that has a beautiful texture on it, and you're looking for a way to set that without any heat. This would work perfectly. So you would leave it at that stage, but obviously we need to push it down so it's flush with our sheet metal. So we can just come over, press down, and at this stage, because it's held really nicely in there, I'm not worrying about doing the opposite edges. Okay, and so now that's really firmly held in there. At this stage, if you wanted to get your parallel pliers, now you'd never do this if this was a stone or a piece of ceramic or something like that that's breakable, because I know like it's not going to do any damage to it. You can just come along and give that a little squeeze with your flat parallel pliers only. Don't use the flat pliers from your like jewellery toolkit, because they are angled, right? So they open and close on an angle rather than open and closing parallel, so it'll squish this end without pushing the far end down. Can't remember where I was up to on that, but anyway, they all look pretty flat down. Okay, so there's our tab setting. It's very exciting. There's a little process going back to front a little bit here, but you can see if you look at it, like that's me not having a little bit of a think ahead about how other processes are going to impact, and there's just that little sliver of brass there where they're now not lining up because of where those tabs have kind of bent up, and it's fractional, but it's not going to let that little drill bit through. And if I drill that out, because the brass is bigger there, it's going to actually turn that circle of brass into an oval of brass, and then, you know, it'd be fractional. You probably can just get away with it, but, you know, we're being really like, this is a demo. We'll do things the right way, even when you've done them the wrong way, and let's just turn it into a tube rivet. So, for our tube rivet, we're going to drill that out to a larger size. So we've already drilled 1.2, and then we drill 1.5. So I'm going to take my 2mm drill bit, get this out of the way.
Just drill into the peg if you need the support.
Oh, that's okay. So you might have noticed that I am a sideways driller and not a downways driller, and it's totally up to you. You know, I'm not discriminatory here. You can drill however you'd like to. Drilling down is really comfortable for a lot of people, and particularly when you've got a micromotor instead of a flexi shaft, it's quite good and easy to do that. I prefer to do like a sideways drill, partly because if you're using a flexi drive, you've got that big flexible shaft. So you do this, and this flexible shaft's going all over the shop and putting a lot of kind of pressure on you being able to hold that nice and steady and straight down. So I just find if you're holding it sideways, that can rest in the crook of your elbow, and all you're having to do, instead of trying to control something down with all that weight behind it, you're just using it like a pencil and you're just pushing. Or it's like a little tiny movement. So I learned that when I did like a pave setting course, and you're having to drill and burr out like hundreds of holes at once, and it's a god-awful nightmare. And you have a lot more control. So I'm not saying it's the right way or the only way to do it, but it is. If you haven't tried it, don't bang it till you try it. Don't bang it till you try it. You know, whatever. Oops, no, not turning that on. How's this work? So, there we go. All right, and then
so that's 1.5.
Sorry, this is 2mm, and that was just because I couldn't find a 2.3mm drill bit at my studio, so I could have just pinched one from here. But anyway, I found a 2.3 ball burr, so I'm going to use that to get it out like pretty close to 2.4. So you'll notice when you buy drill bits, like 2.3 is the largest size that you can get, because that is the diameter of the shank, so that's what fits in here. For twister, you can't really go bigger than that. And then when you start to buy like machinery drill bits, they go in 5mm increments. So then the next size up is 2.5, which is bigger than our 2.4. So if you had a 2.4 ball burr, that's great, but I just happen to only still have a 2.3 ball burr. So what I'm going to do is drill it out with that. If you are really confident using a ball burr, you can actually use that ball burr to just make that hole a little larger, or you can grab your round nose file and just file it out a smidge bigger. So it really, you just really want to make sure you don't go a bit too gung-ho and make like a big loose hole. Keep trying to sit with my foot. Okay, so first, before I start doing anything else, I'll just check, because maybe I just wiggled that ball burr a little bit or my drill bit a little bit more when I was using it, and that happened to enlarge it, and it did, so I'm just going to stop there. But if it was, I just couldn't get it through, grab your file and you're going to file in there. What you're going to do, this is a bit weird, but I just want to try and like make this into a giant explanation. You don't want to just file willy-nilly, because you're going to create a funny oval shape. So you want to file in and out, but moving around in a nice circle. So just be really controlled in those movements. Same if you're using a ball burr. I don't have anything that looks like a ball burr, but it's that same, like just go around in a nice little circle. And if it's just literally 0.1 of a millimeter, you know, just going in and out a couple of times with a ball burr would probably be enough. So like me pushing through and then coming back out while that was still running was enough to just enlarge it that little bit more. Okay. So just got a touch of a burr there. So So I'm just going to run my file over it, which isn't... Oh, who wanted to know about scrapers before? Someone was asking. Scraper would work well. Anyway, there's just a little bit of a burr there to get rid of. Using that deburr, so that larger drill bit's going to be the best, because if you sort of file, you're really likely to mark your piece, and if you're not wanting to do any more sanding and polishing to it, best to avoid that. Okay, so everything I said before about 50% of the diameter of the wire, you will ignore for a tube rivet, because obviously tubing can be, you know, you might be doing a tube rivet that's like, we're probably not going to do this big, but, you know, much larger. Okay, so what you want to do is use approximately like 1 to 1.5 millimeters protruding from either side for your tube rivet, because all we're wanting to do is just sort of flare and fold down that tubing, okay, around it. When we don't, if you have 50% of the diameter and you've got like 2 millimeters sticking out or 3 millimeters sticking out, all that's going to happen is you'll split the tube, okay, and it won't look like a nice tube rivet. Cool. So again, if you are a particular person, you could measure that. You could say, okay, well, I know I've got 1 mil aluminium, 0.5 brass, and I need 1 mil on either side, so that's, I've just forgotten what it says, a 4.5 mil long one of these. That's great. You know, if you want to do things the Clare way, just stick it in, go, oh, that's about 1 millimeter sticking out. Oh yeah, I'll just put a mark at about 1 millimeter. And we got our little piece that should be roughly the right size. It's never not worked for me, so. Okay, so I've got a little pair of chenier cutters here. So if you haven't used chenier cutters before, this little guide here, there should be one on the opposite side, but that's snapped off. So these are my dodgy class pair. But this section is where you'd pop your saw blade into, okay? So we put our piece of tubing in and put the little grip down. Make sure the mark that we put on is lined up with where we're going to saw, and then we say, oh, Andrew, may I please have a saw frame with a saw blade in it? Every time. And a saw blade. And this is, I always say I'm gonna have everything this time, and I think, what do I need for each of these techniques? Never have it all. Never have it all. But basically, if you might be doing a piece where you need multiple pieces of tubing, so later when we do the spacer rivets, you probably need multiple pieces of tubing, or just say the design was you were using these little tube rivets as eyelets, so you can actually use the same technique on leather or on fabric and make eyelets. So you'd need to do lots of them. If you want to cut multiple pieces the same, that's what this little guy here is for. There's a little doodad here that opens and closes. Set it exactly where you want it, whatever that is, and then tighten that up, and then you can just butt it up against that guide every time. But I only need to cut one, so I'm not going to bother. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, while he's waiting,
yeah.
Where did you measure it?
Where was the mark?
Yeah.
It was just there. You see that little black mark
and then,
there? And then it's popping in here, and that black mark is lining up with this little gap in here, in between those plates, because that's going to guide my saw so that I cut nice and straight.
Okay.
If you try and cut tubing, you can cut tubing without chenier cutters, that's fine, but you usually don't do a particularly straight job, and then you end up filing a lot. And as we all know, tubing is about like 2.5 times the cost of just wire, so you don't want to go ahead like wasting lots of it. Yeah, so this is just makes it a little easier. You could certainly use it for any wire if you wanted to get a really nice straight cut. So you know, if you wanted to measure it out on that 1.5 wire, there's no reason you couldn't put that in there and cut it, and instead of using snips. Yeah, I'm just lazy, so I use snips because it's faster.
May I ask you,
Yes.
while we're waiting,
Yeah.
the top material you use there, is that aluminium or
Yes,
silver?
it's just aluminium.
Okay.
So
And the lower one is brass, isn't it?
yes, that's correct.
So what do you use for tubing? Does it matter? Does it react?
It doesn't really matter. I am using silver just because I only had silver tubing. I didn't have any like brass or copper. I haven't seen aluminium tubing anywhere, but it's not to say you can't get it. It's probably, you know, if you look on eBay, I'm sure you'd find it.
Pretty hard to get aluminium tubing that size.
Yeah. So
it's not
usually
necessary
bigger.
either, is it? Or I mean,
No.
you know, like in terms of chemical reaction or tarnishing, etc. You know, with
no, for tarnishing, that's not really. I mean, silver's gonna tarnish no matter what. Brass and copper are gonna tarnish no matter what. You know, there's not. You just kind of like just accept that into your life that it's going to tarnish. You might have to give it a polish. Oh, thank you, bless you. So.
Now that's a sample of a new brand of saw blade.
Oh, good. What is the new brand?
Tell you later.
What size have you given me?
I think he meant don't break it.
2.0.
It's 2.0. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to utilize this tray for when that falls out. That's typical.
Always happens.
Holy, yeah.
If you're making like a pillow bead,
Excuse me?
if you're making like a pillow bead, so you've got two domed bits of metal and you solder them together.
Yes, yeah.
And you want to put like a big, I guess effectively like a big metal tube in the middle that you could run a wire through.
Yes.
Is it effectively just like a giant tube rivet?
Well, to be honest, I wouldn't use riveting on a hollow form like that. I would just solder that in, because if you were to then start hammering it to spread it, you risk kind of like crumpling that bead. But if you were to wanting to do it without solder, so you wanted to have two halves that weren't soldered together, you could put a spacer in between them, and then so we could have your wire, thread one half, put a piece of tubing in, that's the inside diameter of that sphere, put the other side on, and then you could tube rivet that, and then make like a sphere.
And
but
that spacer would give
and that spacer would be the support so that you could hammer that rivet head and kind of create that. Cool. So that little guy, he's just been sawn, so you want to file and sand. I just typically use, this is narrow. Oh yes, good. So the easiest way to hold that is put it on your round nose pliers. Sometimes some of the budget ones are like really fat at the ends and it doesn't fit the fine, and that's like, it makes me cry. It really makes my life harder, but this does, so that's good. Otherwise, just put it in a ring clamp or something like that, or if you've got really little hands and you just want to hold it. Okay, and after I've filed it, I'm going to go to the extra effort of sanding it. So I'm just going to use a little bit of 400. Won't take much. And a little bit of 1,000. And that's because we are really going to see that rivet head, okay? And it's not getting hammered in the same way that our other rivets are, which could remove any little marks if you've got a really nice polished surface on your metal. We're not burnishing it out, we're just spreading it. So we do want to make sure for our final rivet to look really nice that we go ahead and file and sand. Yes.
So sometimes, run my hand over tube riveted pieces and they've got little sharp catches on them. Is that because they have?
It might be. I mean, it's probably hard to definitively say. So yes, it might be that. It might be that. I'm going to show you this. What we're going to use this guy for at the end is just to tap it down, and sometimes, not everyone will always hit it down with a flat hammer at the end, and then sometimes it's just not sitting quite totally flush against the piece, so it could be that as well. I'm not sure, like maybe it's split a little bit and there's a little, so could be any of those sort of factors for sure. Alright, so we've got our little piece of tube rivet in our little hole there. I'm gonna use our steel block for this. Okay, so I'm going to show you the other types of riveting afterwards, but tube riveting, just get it into your head, it's a completely different process than your other types of riveting, okay, because we're not hammering the head to sort of spread a solid piece of metal out, we're just flaring tube. So this is where this little guy comes in really handy. So this is a chasing tool with conical head, but you could equally, if you had a center punch that was like had a suitable cone-shaped profile. Some of them are very wide and shallow, some of them are like too narrow. So you want something that's going to, like the conical end is going to go inside your tube, but not be so narrow that it, like the point of that comes out and hits your steel block, because that will damage your steel block. So you need something that's got like a sufficiently wide cone. Also, some of them, if you look at them, they kind of have the cone and then they go straight up. So, you might find that little cone fits into your tubing the first hit, but then it reaches this straight edge, and then that will start to mar your piece if the straight edge of your center punch goes inside. So you kind of understand what I'm saying? Like, you've got to have something that's conical, but like smoothly conical the whole way, and not too narrow that it's going to fall inside. So depending on the piece of tubing that you use, this might not be the correct cone for a different, like a bigger piece of tubing. So you might need to have a little array of cone-shaped things.
So you don't use that?
We will use that.
You don't use that to start with?
No. Well, I mean, you could. So that's fine. If you had a really good set of dapping punches with a good range, you can certainly start from a very small, like doming block head. But like this one, for example, is too small because that fits inside, so that's not going to work. And then this next guy that I have up is kind of too large, like he's just going to probably shoot off the side. So if you had really excellent control, you maybe get away with it, but using a cone to start it off is going to be better. And you'll note that I am missing the size in between. That would probably be really convenient, but that got used obviously on some other demo somewhere, and I can't remember where.
Another thing called Tonda is here, like an aluminium to create cones from tubes. You sell it here. It's Italian.
Yeah.
Like a setting plate?
No, it's not a setting plate. How do you call it in English?
Andrew?
Or what's it called?
What's it actually called?
Creates a cone from tube.
The Italian, it's an aluminium, and it creates cones out of tubes.
It's a flaring
We bought
tool.
it here for the club.
The setting plate?
No, it's a flaring tool, I think.
Yeah,
you're
it's a
talking about.
flaring
Yeah.
tool for tubes.
Yeah, you're just flaring the edge. All she's doing with the scriber is flaring
I'll
the edge
find
of
it and
the tube.
Yeah, sorry, I might just...
Yeah.
It's a flaring tool.
Yeah. Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, you could make your own one of these really easily. You don't have to go out and buy like fancy tool steel and temper it and stuff. Like literally go buy.
Yeah, well,
get
2
nails.
hours drive.
Exactly,
Just
and nail.
smooth it off
Perfect.
Thank you.
on a
Go.
Oh, down
belt
That's a
sander.
good idea.
Exactly. Get a center punch that's not the right size cone, and yeah, just on a belt sander until it's the right size. Like, you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I just have this, so I was like, that's perfect, I'll use that. You look around a jewellery supplier, your desk, you'll find something, most likely. And like lots of center punches work fine for this. Anyhow, got this. I'm just going to use my big banging hammer. I'm not going to use my chasing hammer. And I'm going to pop it on, and just like one firm hit like you were center punching. Okay? You don't want to go like God almighty hit, or like a little tiny ding. So just in the middle, but just whatever you do the same on the other side. So if you accidentally whacked it really hard, flip it, whack it really hard on the other side, and then you'll flare them evenly. But if you're like bang, ting, bang, ting, you're going to have one side with this huge, beautiful, like, rivet head, and the other side that's just going to fall out because there's no metal there. So we'll flip them over, pop them down, and already it's flared enough that it's not going to come out of that hole, but it's still wiggling. Yeah. So
Claire, can you show that to the camera too?
Like this?
No, the finished
Flare.
At the very end? Yes, I will. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Could you show it now? Sorry, could you show it now so we can see it?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So can you kind of see if I push that, it doesn't come out the other side, but see how it's still moving?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's flared, but it's not flared.
Yeah.
Like I would use this cone shape, flipping it over until that's firm. Okay, and so it's not wiggling back and forth. It's not to say that like you couldn't just skip ahead, but I have found that I get the best results when I use this to really like fix it in place, and then I'm only using the doming punches to like continue the flaring out. Now I just hit that side. Yeah, no, I lost track.
This is going to be a brooch as well? Or?
It's actually not. I don't know what it's going to be now. It was going to have a tube rivet at the top and put a jump ring through and be an exciting Easter ornament of some description. But
Easter egg brooch.
Yeah, I mean, if you, for example, put a bigger tube in and create a hole with a tube frame, then you can use it as a hook or something to put in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I kind of wanted to put it at the top, because now I'm going to have to use a bloody huge jump ring to put through there. But that's okay. Like, no stress.
I love it.
One hit, and I can feel that. Still got a bit of wiggle. Might give it another go. Okay, that's pretty good now. There's a tiny bit of movement, so if I wanted to, I could probably just go once more. But that's really firm now, so I'd be very happy with that. Now, I'm going to go to your doming punches. Obviously, as I was saying before, this one's too small, right? If I had my next size up, I would actually use that one next, but we got to work with what we got. So we're going up. This is probably a touch. It's fine, but if there was one that was not going to fall inside, but whatever the next size up that you have, use that one, okay? I'm just missing one. I did a workshop in Van Nuys. I think I left it there. I might have to call that school and be like, have you guys found a little doming punch floating around? Okay, so just line it up, keep everything nice and straight. Now, also, I just do this onto a steel block because it's easier, but there are people, I've seen it done where they will clamp this into a vise and pop this on and do both sides at once. And that's great as well. You still need to flip it over because obviously your domes are not the same size, but I just find that really awkward. If you've got two people and you've got someone who can kind of like help hold things and look at them, that's fine, but it can get, I just sort of find it a bit awkward, so I have not had any issues just doing it straight onto a steel block. But just be aware, you might, if you go on YouTube, you might see like 4 different ways of doing this tube rivet, okay?
Is that just it neatening it off?
What this is doing is like, so we flared it, say, to here with our cone, and then this is bigger, so it's going to flare it out to here, and then as we keep using bigger ones, it's going to I can't make myself stretch more, but like it's just flaring it out flat. It's like curling up and over. Yeah.
Countersink a tube rivet?
You certainly can. So countersinking is where it's also sometimes called a flush or an invisible rivet. You have your 2 sheets of metal and we drill our hole in for our wire, and then we use a ball burr to like create a countersunk space at the top. So we just remove a little bit of metal around that drill hole. So you can do that with a standard rivet. But you can also do that with a tube rivet, and it's exactly the same process, but before you start your tube rivet, you just need to use a larger ball burr to create a countersink around it that's kind of approximately the thickness of your tube rivet. So if you've got like a
1/2 mil wall.
Yeah, thank you. Like if you've got like a 1/2 mil wall, you want it to sort of cut out about half, a little bit more, because it's going to flare. It's going to like not just be the thickness but also flare, but you know, like approximately the same plus just a little bit of wiggle room. Does that make sense?
Use a ball burr that's 1/2 mil.
Well, not necessarily, because if you think about a ball burr like this, that's the diameter increasing, but you don't have to use the whole diameter. You're using like the bottom section, right?
Yeah.
So I don't usually like measure and say, oh, I specifically need this. I'll just, you know, just pick up a ball burr, put it on. It's not, you know, as long as it's bigger than the hole that you're trying to do, that's going to start carving it out, and then just look at it and be like, yeah, I've got about the Clare method. I know, isn't that terrible? I've got about 1/2 mil, a bit more than 1/2 mil. That's going to be enough. If you flare your piece out and there's too much metal there, like, just file it down, because you've still got that countersink, and so you've still pushed it out. It's still holding it in there. But if you've got a bit too much metal, you just file it back, sand it back, and then it'll be totally flush. So, yeah, throwing in the curlies. All right, that's looking pretty good now. Can you just kind of see? I don't know. I'll probably just have to pass it around because it's so small. But it's kind of flaring out, and I'm sort of noticing as I'm doing it, it's not really spreading it anymore. So I know that it's time to move up to my next size. And I polished a few of these so that they would be nice. Note the polished versus the not polished surface. Whatever surface this has, it will impart onto your piece. So for the tube rivet, you're generally not really planning to go ahead and do any extra filing or sanding on it. So having that nice polished surface on what you're hitting it with will impart that onto your piece. If I hit it with something like this, it's going to put a dullness into that tube rivet. Now, you can certainly whip it under like a polishing buff for a little bit, but with a rivet, you don't want to polish too much after you've done the rivet head, because if you're too vigorous a polisher, you just polish that rivet head right off and it'll come out. So just enough to shine it is fine. And as well, I mean, all those little gaps are real hard to get the polishing compound out of there. So if you can avoid having to polish it afterwards, that's primo. What did I polish these with? I just used Triple E and Polynum because that's just what I had at my studio. But you can get like steel polishing compound, which will like is that like a
Triple E is steel bright.
Okay.
And the best one would be the diamond ring.
Yeah.
Oh, you can use diamond for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No. So just like your best bet is to have a separate mop to do that with. I didn't, but you probably should. I just used like a crappy old one that I was like, well, I know this one's a bit crappy and old anyway. So that might turn into my steel polishing mop. So, but yeah.
Buying a new mop.
Yep.
No, I have 2 new ones. That's why I could sacrifice one. Anyway, but yeah, just get those surfaces nice and shiny so that it's going to put a nice polish onto your piece as it goes around. I also did the same with my little wee chasing hammer here, because I'm going to use that nice flat surface. Now, you don't have to use a chasing hammer, it's just that I like this one because it has a nice flat surface that's just like ever so slightly curved at the edges, just ever so slightly, which means that when I hit it, it's less likely that I'm going to like accidentally on the angle put a big like crescent ding into my piece. So you could use a hammer like this. This one's really crappy, it's got lots of marks on it, but you could take one like this, polish that surface really nicely and just knock off those corners, so you don't risk banging your piece as you go. So it doesn't have to be a big one or an expensive one, it just has to be a nice flat polished one. I think I've even seen some YouTube clip where they just use like 2 steel blocks, like to get to this hammering stage and just put on. But that's going to be less control, and depending on what your piece is that you've got in there, it's going to be suitable for some things and absolutely not suitable for others. So if you had a little ceramic pendant that you were trying to tube set a hole in the middle, you would just, I think you should just put it in the hydraulic press. And
Can I have a look at this tool? Was it this tool?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you make that one, or did you
I
buy
did. I made it when we did like a chasing workshop. So we made a set of chasing tools and then we learnt the techniques. But like that was about 5 years ago. I don't think I can make another one now. I'd have to go look at my notes because I'm like, oh, it was something about like straw yellow and putting it in olive oil, but that's about all I've got. But like truly for what we're doing, like this is not putting a huge amount of pressure on it. You literally, as Helen was saying, just use a nail, use a screw. Go to the Rockley markets and just like buy 5 centre punches from the tool selling guys there for 50 cents each, and you know, put different cone on. Thank you. So so I'm just gonna
Show it to the camera.
it's not finished yet. Should have worn more makeup. I don't think I've sworn, so I'm feeling pretty good. So anyhow, I'm just using these slightly larger ones to just flare it out. Just do that a few times on each.
So I noticed it was a little bit rough around the edges when I sort of felt it. So will that sort of tidy that up?
But
When
yes,
I put
yeah.
my finger against it, it just felt tight.
On the rivet,
Yeah.
yeah. So the more that I do this, the flatter it's going to become, the softer it will feel, and then that final stage with the chasing hammer, that's going to just push it down as far as it goes. If you still felt a little bit of sharpness, that might happen. Just like give it a quick polish over, and it might just have had a little burr that we didn't catch, or it's just a little tiny bit of an angle. You're just going to knock that little sharp edge off. Okay, I'll just go to that last. Oh, you won't really notice too much difference at this stage, I don't think, but it is making a minimal amount of difference. Just get this last guy. Okay, so like I'd be pretty happy with that. If I feel it's reasonably smooth, I can look at it and see that it's looking nice and even. However, sometimes the most common thing that goes wrong with this is that you're holding this guy and you just accidentally hit one side a bit more than the other side. Okay, that's really common. Like it'll happen all the time when you're doing it. You go F. You can try to fix it up as you're going by then compensating by putting a bit more pressure on the opposing side, the side that's higher, and hitting that. But often you'll get to this stage and it's still looking a little bit wonky, and this is like the fixer of all sins, because it will just tap it all down nice and evenly. So and things that you sort of think about when you haven't really thought too much about a design when you're doing Easter eggs. These claws here are probably just stopping that from sitting against the steel block. So if you had access to something narrow, or for example, if you had like a little vise and you had a nice surface on your hammer, you could clamp your hammer in, and then I could pop this on here, and then this side would be hitting the steel block, which would be better because you'd be burnishing both sides at once. And there's these are probably just digging into the aluminium a little bit. Aluminium's quite soft. It's probably not too noticeable with this, but particularly if you were, say, if this piece wasn't aluminium but was timber or something like that, you need it to be supported by steel on both sides when you're doing it. So that's something to think about as well. Anyhow, so that is now looking nice and flat. I'm going to pass it around, have a little look, particularly on the back. You can kind of see it a bit more. When you buy the tube, the inside is kind of black often, so it's like, the pickle or whatever hasn't like gotten inside your tubing. So often as you flare it out, a little bit of that oxidized interior starts showing on your tube rivet, and super easy to just give that a tiny little polish over the top, and then it'll just whip it off. It's just a little surface layer of oxidization. It'll come away and it will just make that little tube go ping and look really, really nice. If we'd used like a fraction. You can use a lot more, but if you use a little bit more tubing, you'd get like a slightly bigger looking tube rivet. So you could, like, this is, you know, there's kind of a spectrum. This is small. Use a little bit more tube, you're going to get a bigger, more noticeable tube rivet, but you got to be careful because you'll go from big to a split really quickly. So, you know, do a couple, you know, you'll find you do like 5 tube rivets. Your first 5 tube rivets will all be completely different, and you know, one will be too small, one will be too big, one will split, one will be perfect. So you'll kind of get that feel for, like, you just kind of, you know, go in the middle, err on the side of caution. If you're really worried about splitting, if you've had 5 split, you know, just you're probably cutting your tube a little bit too long. If you just keep getting continually tiny rivets, you're probably being a little bit like scant on how much you're allowing. So, yeah. Tube rivets, yay! Keep passing that one around.
So you've split your tube rivet.
Yes.
Drill it out.
Yeah.
To a place.
Yeah, oh, well, you know, it depends. You could be like, I like this aesthetic of split rivets, if you like. It's still going to be, like, structurally reasonable. Like, it's still got, you know, 3/4 of that tube is holding it in place, but visually it's looking a bit naff. So, yeah.
If you don't have any domes, what could you use instead? Or is that impossible?
Oh, nothing's impossible.
Hammer?
But you could. Yes, so say you had this.
Yeah.
You could probably pop that on, but I wouldn't hammer it like this. You'd put it on and then be controlled, so you get an even spread. So it's a sphere spreading the tube rather than a hammer blow banging aside. Hold it and then pop that.
Right.
So that could work.
Yeah.
I don't
Use a
know.
mallet to hit the steel.
Oh, yeah. You can see why my hammerhead's so completely cactus on that one. Actually, that's because this is the one that goes out when I do like school classes and things. But anyway, I'm just trying to think of what else there could be. I don't know, because I just always had one. I never thought outside the box. But look around.
What you just meant. Something I don't understand why you just said that.
Okay, so when you strike a steel tool with another steel tool, it puts marks in it. So that's why I'm using like this big dud cruddy hammer here. It's about to fall off that head actually. I have to fix that. Like that will put a mark in another one. So because this is a nice hammer, and it's not a nice hammer, but like just say it was a nice hammer that had perfectly polished. If I use that and then hit that with this, that's going to put a mark in that hammer head there, okay? So we would use a mallet because it won't put a mark into it, or you just, if you're okay, if it's got a crappy head, then that's all right too.
The other problem is now as well, if you're buying cheap hammers from hardware shops, a lot of them are being imported and they're cheap cast and they've got little imperfections in them, and people have struck steel on steel and the hammers have just shattered because of the casting imperfections in them. So it's always a good idea never to strike steel on steel, particularly with those cheap cast hammers. So
What about the hammers from here? Is that okay?
Well, you wouldn't do it to the hammers from here because they're not going to be cheap, crappy hammers. You don't want to like damage those.
Cheap crappy.
Yeah.
Cheap crappy. You don't want to do it because they explode. Nice hammers from here. You don't want to do it because you'll wreck your nice expensive hammers.
You don't want to muck your surface up. If you muck your surface up on the hammers that you buy from here and that, when you go to use it on another one, you'll get like a knurling effect on it because there'll be marks that will go into you.
Yeah, but it's okay with the mallet, the hammer and the mallet.
Yeah, with a mallet, yeah.
They can't hammer on hammers.
No.
Okay, good.
So, okay, so that's a tube rivet. Let's go back to where we were starting at and do our just standard rivet. So let's get out of our tube rivet brain set, put that aside. That's one technique. So what did we say? We said 1.5 for our standard rivet. Thank you. And if you get your drill bits all mixed up, just make sure you do use like a pair of calipers or something to measure it and double check. I only have 3 drill bits out, so I know that my middle size one will be 1.5, but it always pays to check because, like, you know, you'll pick up a 1 mil instead of a 1.2 or a 0.9, and, you know, it'll give you a pain in the bum. Anyway, okay, so you can see I've got my little pilot hole there. So that's awesome. I don't need to center punch or anything like that because that's going to guide my drill bit. And I'll just turn this on. Accidentally have this on reverse or something. Is it supposed to be on L or R? Did I click that?
Never remember.
I don't know, maybe my drill bit's just a bit blunt. Sorry? Stop. That's the wrong button for stopping. Okay, so the reason that I'm stopping is because that is just, I think my drill bit maybe is a little bit fun, and it's not quite going through the brass. Normally that wouldn't matter, I'd just keep pushing through, but the aluminium's so soft that me doing that, I can already see that I'm starting to enlarge that aluminium hole. So I'm going to stop, I'm going to get a fresh 1.5 drill bit that'll just quickly cut through it and not remove any more metal. Otherwise I won't be able to spread my metal enough to cover that. Okay, so that is really important, especially like with aluminium. It's just so soft that if you're drilling that for too long, it's just going to like enlarge your hole. And I often have problems with this with like all our little first year students at uni, and they're like, oh, what's happened? Like I used a 1 mil drill bit, but they've got this huge hole. Thank you. 1.5. Yeah, cheers. And that's what's gone wrong. It's just that the aluminium's so soft. You won't find that problem so much with the brass and copper. It's so nice when you have a fresh drill bit, isn't it? It's like luxury. I just feel really good with a fresh drill bit. Okay, where did I put that little orange piece of rivet? Oh, bless. Yes, thank you. Nice. Okay. So if you can refresh your memories back to before, we'd cut that with about 50% of the diameter, a bit more than 50% sticking out either side, okay? So we are going to start the riveting process. Essentially we just need a really little, what I like to use is a small ball peen hammer, okay? So what are these, like, are they called like 80? I can't remember what anyway, little ones, I just call them riveting hammers. I could also use this end of my chasing hammer, it's shaped the same, it's going to work exactly the same. I am going to use this purely because this one, if you have a look, it's actually got like a flattened top on it, okay? And I like riveting with a nice round surface because what that does is with each blow, it's spreading my metal, okay? And this is, let's say this is the face of our tube. What I'm actually doing, I'm not hitting the dead center because I am just not that good, right? I'm gonna hit the edges and almost go around, and each blow is like spreading the edge in the direction of the blow. If you can use the flat side, I've seen people do it and do it really well, but what I find when I do it, I use the flat side, I tend to just smear in one direction, okay? So I'm not getting a nice even spreading of that head. I'm usually getting it, I'm favoring it, that it goes off in one direction. So it's not to say that you can't use this side, it's just to say like my preference is, and I find it easier to use the bald end, okay? You can also use like a little goldsmith hammer that has the flat end, okay? And the same kind of principle of even spreading applies. So when we use this, just pretend this is our rivet head, we're gonna hit like so, and then we come, it's a bit like doing a bezel, and then we hit the opposite, and then we hit in between, okay? So you have to, when you're using this end, it certainly is done, like works, but you've got to be very precise in where you're hitting. So again, Claire's lazy. No, but I just find this is the easiest way, all right? And you'll kind of look at your rivet head at the end, and it kind of looks faceted. You get these little, like, because each little round hammer blow is ding, 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 ding. If you want that to look less facety, you can flip it over, use the flat side of your hammer and go tap, 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 gentle taps until you get a flat surface on your hammer. Don't go overboard because you'll just spread it out like a pancake, but just gentle taps to flatten it, and then you'll have a flat appearance. You can also use a cup burr. So if you have a large enough rivet head, put a cup burr, which is like the inverse of a ball burr. So it's like the inside is concave. Thank you. Yeah. and you can just pop that over the top of your rivet head, and it'll give you a nice little dome surface. If you're going to use that though, I'd polish over the top after you've used the cup burr. Yes.
Now, Claire, you know, almost inevitably people use wire to rivet. But is there any reason why, if you cut out a particular shape, you can't use, say you got flat stock that's like, you know, your mill or whatever, thicker, cut out the corresponding shape and then use that as a rivet?
As long as the profile of your rivet material is exactly the same profile, that tight fit, no, there's no reason that you couldn't have a triangular rivet. If you had triangular wire and a triangular hole and they fit together, it's just that that's a pain in the butt. So, like, generally
you'd lose the profile of the head because you're pushing the metal out. So it's not going to keep that profile as much.
Yeah, like you'd have to be extremely consistent in your blow. So say you were doing a triangle, you'd probably be wanting to use this guy, the flat edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and you'd need to get your big old magnifying glasses on. And so, yeah, like, I mean, but like if you think about it, like you're just needing to spread the metal out so that it's coming over the, like, what would you even call it? I don't know. I can't.
Flowering the head of the
Yeah, exactly. As long as it's spreading and becoming larger than the hole that you've created, it will sandwich in there. It's just that it'll be really difficult to not do it with the round wire. But like if you had a little hand punch that punched out a triangle and you had that wire that was just the same and you were really good with your hammering, sure. And then that could be like a really exciting and cool effect. It'd just be a lot of work.
Yeah, I was just thinking as an alternative, say if you did marriage of metals, but a cold connected marriage of metals, that would probably drive you mad doing it.
I think so. Yeah. But, you know, whatever floats your boat. I mean, think about, you could, I guess, like a countersunk rivet, you could, I mean, do the same process and, like, at least that way you're forcing the metal in and then filing back, and you'd kind of get that. But again, you've still got to get that profile to match the void. Yeah. So, you know, anything's possible. Nothing's impossible. It's just if you can be bothered. All right, so going back to this guy. What time is it? Oh my gosh, we're probably going heaps over time.
11:15. 11:15.
Okay. Beat it up. All right, so little teeny tiny taps, like tap, 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 just, you know, be very dainty and delicate. Like this is, you know, you're always like probably told by your teachers, like, nah, you've really, like, you know, hold it and file it and put some oomph into it. This is where we're gonna like just drop out. Just be like really relaxed and really like tiny taps. Because if you hammer the crap out of it, you're gonna have like a giant rivet head on one side, nothing on the other side. Okay, so just listen. Ooh. Flip it over. And now you'll note that I'm just using the corner here so that the tube rivet and the little tabs aren't interfering with that, like being supported by the steel block. You know, and at this stage, not a lot's happening, okay? Just, and when I turn it over, I'm just going to make sure I just push down a little bit to make sure there's some metal protruding there. Oh, and a great little tip, especially when you're starting out, you tend to like go whoops and like bang everywhere except on your rivet head. If you put a little bit of masking tape on either side, you know, you're tapping pretty gently, so that masking tape will kind of just soften the blow. You won't put a ding in it, okay? So that's my little tip from me to you.
You're saying straight on top of the rivet.
Straight on top of the rivet. And have you a piece of masking tape? Doesn't really matter if you don't, but like just
Electrical?
I don't know. I haven't tried. I'm not willing to experiment in a demo with electrical tape. I'll stick to my masking tape theory. It probably would work, but the good part with masking tape is it's nice and thin, so once you hammer this a couple of times, the rivet head becomes exposed and really visible, and then you can see it when you're tapping, whereas I don't know how well I'm going to be able to see the rivet head with that. Okay, so it's starting to get a little bit firmer. I'm going to have to push down a little bit harder to get some of that metal to be exposed. And what I'm going to do now, just because we did have that little bit of extra material with the aluminium that came away when I was drilling, I'm just going to do like a sort of like a double amount of tapping just to increase the size of the rivet head on the aluminium side, to just kind of cover, just in case it's like a little bit too big, that hole. I just want to make sure I've got a little bit more material to compensate. But I only did that once I'd kind of gotten to the stage where that piece of wire is held pretty stiffly in there, because I wouldn't want to do a lot on the aluminium side and then have nothing left on the brass side to actually hold it in. And look, at this stage, this is riveted, like that's really firm in there. And I'm just kind of hammering so that at the moment the shape is kind of like this, like it's like the rod, and I've been hammering the top and it's spreading out. The more I hammer, the more I'm going to get like a sort of domed rivet head. If you don't want a domed rivet head, you might want something that looks a little bit more just inverted cone shape. You just leave it like once that's firm and secure in there, then it's all just about aesthetics, okay? Yeah.
Is there any recipe? Maybe you said it earlier.
Yes.
And I really
That's okay.
it.
Yeah.
The piece of copper wire
Yes.
you put in there now, just to have it sit in the material you put it into,
Yeah.
firmly. Is there a minimum length? Like, for example, saying the thickness of the material you're going through plus
Yeah,
same
so
thickness again?
yeah, so about the diameter of your wire, which in our case was 1.5, you want about 50 to 75% of that diameter sticking out either side.
Okay.
So I would want about 0.75 to a millimeter sticking out either side for 1.5 wire. If it was 2 mil wire, I'd want about like 1 to 1.5 mil sticking out either side. That's okay. And sorry, I did jump around a lot with this demo piece. Damn it. So that was probably out of context.
You could make it longer if you want to have it wider tearing in the surface.
If you made it, you could probably make it like a touch longer, but if you make it too long, it'll just bend over. It won't spread. Like the wire will just, you'll hit it and it'll just go over. So if you want a fatter rivet head, drill a bigger hole and use thicker wire. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. So pass that around. That's riveted just with that. Have a look. so you can see that that surface has that like faceted look that I'm talking about. If you look a little bit closely, you'll see on the aluminium side the rivet head's just a bit smaller, and that's because given that that drill bit was probably doing this a little bit, it probably has a little bit of countersinking going on in there, right? So it's filling it up, so we're getting that slightly smaller head on one side, slightly bigger head on the other side. You know, when you're doing your rivets, just keep looking and like evening it up. So that's why I sort of stopped halfway through and was like, I'm going to hammer this aluminium side a little bit more to just try and enlarge that head so that we have a bit more like evenness from side to side. In saying that, if you've got a really big rivet head on one side, a small rivet head on the other side, as long as they're both actually rivet heads and one isn't sort of flush and going to fall out, it's still going to hold it. It's just that aesthetically it might be a bit odd. That's great. So when I get that back, I will really quickly just use the flat side of my hammer to flatten it, so you can kind of see how you can go from that faceted to a flat look. Matt Dwyer from Theo, I saw this awesome little piece of his that I love, which is a really good example of how, like, you know, you can use rivets aesthetically. And he made this small robot which was all riveted together, and he like flattened the rivet head so that they were flat, and then he just filed a little line in the center, and it looked like screws. So it wasn't screwed together, but it looked like little like screw heads, and it was just like this lovely little aesthetic touch that's completely structurally unnecessary, but because he's making this little robot, just worked perfectly on that piece. So, you know, that's what I'm just talking about when I'm like, this is a rivet, but then there's all these different ways that you can think about being creative in your finishing of that rivet to get the aesthetic that you want on that final piece.
Would he have used more of a ball head rivet?
Sorry?
I said, would he have used more of a ball head rivet to give it the screw height, or was he flush? Because you can't screw into it once it's flush.
It wasn't flush. Yeah, like I don't know actually if
He would have done
I don't
hit it with a file and just put a scribe through the centre of the rivet, so to make it look like a screw.
Yeah, well, I don't think he would have necessarily filed it because that might have like removed a bit too much. But I think just tapping it with the hammer to give it the flattened appearance. I don't think he would have used a ball rivet and flattened it just because it didn't look like that. Like it didn't. I just feel like sometimes with the ball rivet, if you have a look at it, it's hard to. It would be hard to get it like when you hit it flat, to not sort of squash to a side or to have like a little dud. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But I don't know. Like I didn't actually ask him what route. I just saw it. I was like, oh, that's so clever.
And then sometimes people put the wire into the bites, just a tiny bit sticking up, and then hammer it.
Yeah.
And that'll just spread flat.
Yeah.
Far around to shape. So.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great way. If you want to like pre-form a rivet head, so say it's like, I don't know, it might be something awkward, like say you want to rivet something onto a ring, and you can't get your hammer inside a ring, right, to create that rivet head. So you can pre-form it. So in the way that Helen was talking about, you can use a steel block, or you can just use parallel pliers or like a little vice grip or something to hold it, and then you hammer it. You've got to steel blocks are great, right? Because they're just like a rivet head. So if you put it in and you hammer, it's going to spread evenly. If you have to use parallel pliers, which
you use an old drawer plate.
Yes. What were you? Isn't that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Putting it into an old drawer plate,
Yes.
though, and hammering it.
Yeah.
Not holding it with parallel pliers.
Yeah, but isn't.
Yeah, that's a separate one.
Yes.
The old watchmakers, you can buy just a cheap staking and they're about that big, and you can just buy them used for like, $15.
Yeah.
And that's
nice. I mean, you could probably just get a thick piece of brass and drill the holes in and like that. So, but if you just have a pair of pliers, like parallel pliers, you can still do it like this. You just hold it, tap, 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 but you just need to twist it like a quarter turn, tap, 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 twist it a quarter turn, because it's only going to be spreading where the metal steel is. But then, all you have to do is, say for a ring, you've got your holes, you pop it through, you've got one rivet head already nicely formed, peg it on a ring mandrel to support it, rivet the other side. So there's heaps of depending on your piece and its limitations, there's no one way. Like, you just have to kind of get creative about it. As long as it just has to be supported is what's really important.
And if you really want to get or buy, I tried to buy one, these tiny little screws and nuts as well as a counterpiece. Do you have any idea to get them into? Do you have those?
Sorry, say that again. I think I just missed the first part of
Little
that.
screws, real ones.
Yes.
Nut and bolt.
Nut
Yeah.
and bolt set.
Yeah.
Micro ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we sell screws, generic pack of screws. The trick is getting the thread cut properly to use them. Right. So the best thing you can do is either buy the tap and die set and make your own screws and your own nuts. Then you can make them out of silver. It'll be beautiful on the piece.
Yes.
Right. The other alternative, and if you're not using base metal, hobby shops. Go to the hobby shop because they use lots of small screws, etc., for remote control helicopters, cars, planes,
Okay. Yeah, because
trucks,
I
etc.
didn't.
And you get really small screws and nuts and washers, etc.
Yeah, we looked
But they're all
at
going to be base metal.
electronic supply and things like that, but you know they didn't have them.
But have you got
No, your hobby shop.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
You
But we've got the
stops
tap and
and
die
dies.
sets
Oh, you
here.
got taps and dies. Yeah.
Okay.
We've
Yeah.
got a tap and die set here. Very simple to use. You just cut your thread on your
Wire.
on a piece of wire. Drill out an ingot of silver.
Yeah.
Cut the die on it.
It looks very technical and quite nice in some pieces. I saw it.
Oh, yeah.
I have one piece where I lost one and I wanted to repair it.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, sorry for that.
No, that's okay. That's a good, like, bring it in. Like, that's what this class, these demos are all about. Like, just sharing those ideas and knowledge and everything. Okay, so yeah, so basically if I wanted to flatten that, sorry, I'm just going to rush a little bit here, but it's just a case of until you get the nice flat head that you want. That side's already looking really good because obviously when you're heading this side, it's flattening on the other side as well. So now it just looks like a flat rivet head. I won't pass it around because we're just going to keep punching through. Oh, I will, maybe I will.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, can you kind of see now that that's from even where you are? Hello, people. On there. Okay. Last, really quick, let's get this ball rivet sorted. Okay, so I'm just flipping back to a 1.2 drill bit because that was the size of my. I keep looking for the foot pedal. That's the size of the wire that I was balling. Okay. Okay.
What size was that again?
So 1.2. Alright, so just make sure my wire goes in, beautiful, and then just use a pair of pliers to pull that down. Okay?
So if when you ball that,
Yeah.
your ball that you've created ends up creating more of a run onto the.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah. Okay. So, alright, I'm going to answer that, but first I'm just going to show you something on this. So, you can see this ball is sitting very proud, okay? And if you want that aesthetic, that's great and that's fine. And we can definitely do that. But sometimes you don't want that ball to be quite so proud. Or, as Robin was saying, sometimes you make a little bit of a dodgy bald, and so it might be more of a teardrop shape, or it might have like a little like ugly bit that we don't want to like think about. So if you have that, what we will do, and what I'm going to do, is just countersink a little bit so that we create a little nest. And it's quite nice because it means sometimes what happens if you don't do this as well, if you don't have the perfect little steel nest for it to sit in, which I often don't because you've got your steel block and it's only got particular sizes, it'll just kind of bend a little bit. So you got your nice ball and then it goes, I'm off to the side. But if you countersink and create a little nest, I don't know a better word for that, it's just a little cavity to like cup it, to support it, it's not going to bend over because it's in there, it's held in there nicely. So whilst you can have it proud, I'm going to show it to you countersunk because a lot of the time that's a better finished effect.
It's healthier for your sweaters.
A bit, sorry?
It's healthier for your sweaters as well.
Oh yeah, well actually this is going to be on the front, so we could countersink the back as well. Why don't we countersink the back so you guys can see like a flush rivet as well there. Good thinking. If we have time, sorry. Okay, so I'm swapping over to a ball burr. Okay, I think this is like my 2.3 2.3 or 2.4 or whatever that was from before. So that'll be fine to do my countersink with. And what I was, sorry, you might have noticed that I stopped and rotated my piece, okay? And that was because I noticed that I'm favoring one side. So I'm not a machine, so I'm holding that just off a 90-degree angle. So rather than me trying to correct it with my hand, I go, okay, I'm favoring that. I'm gonna flip it, and then I'll favor the other side equally, and then I have a nice even edge. So, you know, two approaches to kind of correcting the little like human error that comes into play. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my rivet in to just check that I'm happy with the amount of countersinking that is there. So I've just done a little bit. I'm going to pop it in and go, that's fine, that's supporting it, but I think it'd be a little bit nicer if that was a bit deeper. On the other side, I think I'm happy with that. I just need a small little countersink for my to fill my rivet up. But this one, you know, can sort of go as deep as you want it to kind of encapsulate your ball. So whether it's just cupping the bottom of the sphere, or whether it's kind of half burying your sphere. I will not get used to not pushing my foot down. It just feels funny. And if you saw, I just was moving that around a little bit just to sort of more quickly enlarge that. Okay. All right. I'm pretty happy with that. That if I had so the best ball burr that you could use for your ball rivet would be one that was exactly the same, because then so you could measure that, oh, this is like a 1.8 ball, so I'm going to try and use a 1.8 ball burr. Then when you sort of create that cavity, it's going to be exactly the same, so it'll fit nicely. If I go any deeper with that, because this ball burr that I have is bigger than my sphere, it's going to start creating like too shallow a cavity, so my ball will sit here, but my cavity will come out like that, and it'll look too kind of gappy. So I'm kind of like, I'm going to leave it there. That's probably about the max that I can do with that ball burr.
So we use 1.2 wire
yes.
hole, so we should have 1.2 for countersinking?
No. Okay, so yeah, great question. So 1.2 is because my wire is 1.2, but my ball is much thicker, so I need one that's the same size as the ball that I've created on the end. So if you wanted to be very precise, you would just measure that with your calipers, and then you would find a matching. If you have it, you're not always going to have the exact same size. Like, you know, it'd be great if you've got the best kitted out thing in the world, awesome. But you know, you just kind of get what you can that's close to that. It's going to have to be probably that size. It's going to have to be that size or bigger. Okay.
It depends how much material you're going into too. Otherwise, you go right through it.
Well, yes, actually, that's a really good point too. So if I just kept going, you like, it'll work like a drill bit. It'll just go zoop all the way through. So you're kind of limited. Now this, I've got 2 layers of metal there, so you know I could almost go
Through one.
You know, yeah, like it could kind of really be nestled in there. Obviously, you don't want to go more than halfway up your sphere, if that makes sense as well, because then you're going to get a gap. But anyway, there's a delightful little ball. Now, what you want is a where is it? Here we go. Your little block here, which should, now, depending what set you have, you may or may not have a cavity that's going to match your little ball on the end here. So just find what's closest. Don't put it in one that is smaller, and just find the one that is the best. So I've got one here that's obviously much bigger than this, but it's going to be enough to just support it. If the, say, which one? Like this was your smallest one. This is too big for this because realistically, that ball is smaller than the bottom of that dome, so it'll kind of go like that to hit the bottom. So you could just put a couple of layers of masking tape or gaffer tape or something in there just to kind of push it up to support it. You know, if you had some hard timber, some hardwood, and you could use a little ball burr to just, you know, that was the same size to make a little hole in it to support it, that would work as well. So it just, you kind of got to make do with what you've got to hand, okay? So and the inside of that isn't very nice, so what I can do is just take this little polishing cloth and just put it there so that that sort of, I can see it's got a little bit of rust in there, isn't like imparting onto my lovely little ball here. And I can just, you've got to feel like, you know, you'll feel it just push into that little cavity, so make sure it's there. Right. I need to snip this. Now, because I want to countersink the back of this, I would, you know, err on having a little bit too much. Like, you don't want heaps because you're just going to knock it over, but, you know, don't be skimpy, because it's worse if you don't have enough metal to fill up that cavity than if you have too much and you've got to file it back, okay? So you can always take away a little bit of metal, but you can't add any in. So I'm just going to snip this and then file the top back. And it's probably not as necessary with this to, like, have it flat so it's easier to hit, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be hammering it and then we're going to file and sand and everything. So, you know, it's not, you don't have to be too precious about it. That's not going to be the final head that's on your rivet. Okay, and so I only have to hit one side, so I don't have to worry so much about being even on both sides. I just need to keep hitting until I spread that rivet head out. And if you notice you're favouring it, you know, you can always just go whoop, flip that around and do it, because like, you're human, you will favour, like, you know, can't keep your hand in a vice and hit it like a machine. So you just be really aware of how you favour. Okay, so that's hammering in. I'm going to swap to my flat side. Now that my rivet head's, you know, formed, I can't really see any more gaps around there, so I'm just going to flip it. I'm going to force it in that last bit.
Because you're obviously doing your rivet as your last thing, if you're in between stuff, do you have an alternative? Like your hammer head is quite large, so do you have something else you use?
Oh, like if your rivets were close together?
Or you've got something else around that rivet because of what you created?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. So just using that because it's easy. Yeah. So maybe you'd swap to one that has a smaller head. Yeah. That's obviously a size down. Maybe it's even smaller. So what you need is like something like this, but with the end kind of flattened off. So almost like a nail punch. Actually great, just, you know, go buy a secondhand nail punch and polish the end up, because that will be flat, and then you can just pop the little one in and go if it's somewhere like, but you kind of, I guess, yeah, think about planning that out, because it might be somewhere that you can't access, and that's when you got to like pre-do your rivet head and pop it in, or sometimes maybe a rivet's just not going to be possible.
But you can make a little concave punch.
Like a little...
Yeah, a dome.
Yeah, you could do that if you wanted to kind of like shape that head as well. So, you know, it just kind of depends on, I guess, that effect that you want. But yeah, really you'd probably just want it to be flat.
Just a bit around and put a concave in.
So I'm just going to force that in as much as I can, because the more that's in those gaps, the less I'm going to have to file off. Okay, so if you have a look at that, compared to our other rivet head, it is flatter, but you can see it's still protruding up. It's a little bit proud of the metal there, and so that's not technically flush at this stage, right? We want to get it nice and flush. We're going to file that back, so take our file, you know, I'm just going to do this where it is in there to support that little ball rivet. So the annoying part about this is that you will file the rest of your piece, so you are, after you do it, you're going to sand and then you have to polish again, but you know, that's just going to be a factor in your design that you think about. You could also flip over to the curved side to just access that a little bit more, but it probably means that your metal's not super flat to begin with.
Too much, is that you may have cut just that little bit too much rivet length?
At the moment, so yeah, if you had a lot sticking out, that would be, it was probably a bit long. It's not the end of the world, like better to be a bit long than a bit short, but it'll be easier. What the issue actually is at the moment that I'm having to file so much is because this wasn't straight, like flat, because I didn't spend a lot of time getting it very perfect. So if you had like a perfectly flat piece of metal to start with, it would make your life a lot easier. But I'm just going to really try to quickly rip through it so you can see though how you can get it nice and flush. So at the moment what you can see is that like it's looking a lot flatter, right? Because I've been filing, but you can see how here's filing, the sheet metal around it is not, and so I've got to keep going until that is all being filed evenly. Just like when you do, say, a bezel and you're filing that little edge off and you want to file the whole edge of your bezel so it looks even, like this isn't going to look even until I get it all level. If you had a Morse disc as well, that would probably make your life really easy. So you don't have to file it by hand like this. Do you guys know most people use Morse discs or not use Morse discs? Why don't... Hey, Andrew, I might just do a little Morse disc demo if that's okay. I'll just go and steal one off the shelf, or you got plenty. So Morse discs, if you haven't used them before, are really, really great. I love them, can't like say enough. So they're just like a little sanding disc that goes onto your flexi or onto your micromotor, and they're just circular, but it means you can kind of, you know, look here, we need it to be perfectly flat because our files are perfectly flat. This will have a little bit more forgiveness because it's a bit like sanding it, but obviously we're sanding it at like, you know, 30,000 RPM or whatever, and that's going to, you know, go through it a lot quicker. So I'm going to use this extra fine.
What grit have you got there?
This is fine and extra fine. So I would probably say that fine is good, except for I think that that's a extra fine in the fine. There we go. So I would probably just go to fine because fine is still quite coarse. Like I think I don't know what they say the equivalency is, but I find the equivalency to be about like 400 to 600 grit emery paper. So, you know, the coarse is really coarse, like you can use that to replace filing. The medium is sort of, you know, a fine file, like a cut 4 file. This is probably not what they say, but this is just how I would use them. But I'd use the fine as a replacement for a coarse sand.
I really like the fact that you can use it either way, depending on where you are.
Absolutely. So this little disc, I've popped it to the outwards because I'm going to go like this and sweep across. But you could additionally flip it the other way. Okay, this is a bit loose. And say you needed to come in and access an awkward edge, you can come in like so, yeah? So either way that you use it, it just kind of depends on, it feels really loose, but the application. Okay. So when you are using the Moore's disc, don't just go on one spot and go for it, because you'll gouge, like a little circular shaped gouge into it. So keep moving your piece around. But it's very swift. Now, I'm just going to stop that for a second, because this little mandrel's probably been used quite a lot. So the way that these work, there's a little split in there, so when you squeeze it together it makes a square and it fits inside this square, and then you release and it pops apart and the tension holds it in. And like once they've been used for ages, they'll just like squish together, or if someone's like used pliers or something to hold it while they put it in. So because I'm just buying 2 new ones because all of mine have gone like this after a few years, I'm just going to pop in a fresh one, and then it's not going to rattle so much. You can hear the difference? Yeah. So I'm just going to show you as I go. You can see how there's still a few little shadows around that. You can see the low points. So it's not totally flush yet. So we do want to keep going until that is totally flush. So we're probably about halfway there, all right? So don't just stop at that point, because it'll look really nasty. So I'm using fine. If you could use a coarser one and it would certainly be quicker, but then it's sort of more cleaning up.
How fine do these go?
So they go to an extra fine, which is good for like a pre-polish. So, you know, it's probably the equivalent of like, I don't know, 1200 or 1500 or something like that.
Minor little scratches out with that as well, could you?
Absolutely. So you can see this is all covered in scratches. I would just use an extra fine to get rid of those. I wouldn't even bother using this one, because it'd just even more clean up. Really exciting watching me sand things, I know. It's quite thrilling.
Finishing can be very time consuming.
It can be. Look, we're going to be here for a month of Sundays, but I'll just quickly pass that around. It's probably a good spot to go. You can see one side that's perfectly flush and it's kind of blending in. The other side we've got a little bit more to go, and so I'd just, probably at this stage I'd lose my patience and jump up to a coarser one and just be like, oh fine, come back. But basically you want to get it to that point where it's, you know, look at them and see the difference between the two sides. One, you can still see a little crescent. One, you can see it's totally flush and smooth. Now, the reason it's sometimes called an invisible rivet is because if you use the same color of metal, so if you use silver plate and a silver rivet, or copper plate and a copper rivet, once you've gone through this process, it will be just about perfectly invisible to the naked eye, as long as you have, you know, filled it up with the metal and then sanded it back to completely flush. Okay, and so you'd go through, you'd file, you'd sand, you'd polish, and then it would be extremely hard to detect that rivet. Likewise, if you want to create like a really cool polka dot pattern or something, it's a little bit like the married metals, but like a cold version, because you're not soldering things in, and you can flush that all back and you could have a pattern and it would just look like spots of coloured metal in there. So yes, so pass it around, have a look at both sides, check out the ball rivet and the flush rivet. Do we have time to quickly do the little egg cup thing, or have we gone a bit over? Sorry if we've gone a bit over time. I'm a bad timekeeper. So what I just wanted to quickly show you, it's not the forming part's not really cold joining, but I'm going to create a little cup for an egg. So I've already started using my doming block to shape this into a dome. The reason it has wobbly edges is because I just cut it with wobbly edges, hoping that it would look like a cracked egg, but I think that it might just look like a flower or something. So anyway, we'll see how that goes when it's finished. Should have maybe done a bit more jagged, I don't know. But you'll get to a point with your doming blocks where the next size, so I've shaped it in this one, right? The next one, size down, it's too big for. And if I were to just force that in there, probably at this stage you probably force it in there, but it's ideally there's a better way to form that up past that sort of halfway point. So what we do is we hold our dome on an angle like this, and then we find a peg which is smaller than this. So we don't want one that's going to match, we just want it to be a bit smaller, so we've got some gap in there, and then we're going to hammer it. See how it's kind of almost squashed it into a bit of an oval shape? And we're just going to keep moving that around. And we'll just keep hammering that, and it will start forcing those edges up higher until he's going to sit inside. Okay, and then we can find one that just fits in there, and that will just keep perfecting that shape. And then if I wanted to go to the next one down, which I'm not sure if it's that one, that's probably this one. See, it's too big for that one. Okay, go get one that's a bit smaller. I don't have a set as well. Like I chose a set that went from extremely small to very large, which is great in that it gives me a big range, but it's also awkward because I'm missing some of those sort of like in-between stages. So sometimes you're like, oh, I've just kind of got to skip, or I wish there was something in the middle. So it's just something to think about when you're getting if you're getting a doming set, what you're going to use it for most.
Allows you to get the edges higher than
yes, absolutely. So we're going to get a shape that is essentially like the top cracked off an egg, if you know what I'm saying.
So what you're doing is almost like a little mini sequin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just tiny. If you're wanting to make a perfect sphere, generally you won't be able to do it just by doming in here, because they don't come up high enough to be exactly halfway. So you'd go just once more, like, so you'd sort of work it out what's the most you can sort of dome it with, and then do this technique once, and that'll just bring it up past halfway, and then you sand it back down, and then you do that to two, pop them together, you'll end up with a perfect sphere. Otherwise you end up with a just slightly squash sphere, if that makes sense. So there's only going to be so far that you can go before you're going to need to anneal it, and I think I'm starting to reach that point. But you know, if you anneal in between each size, you can get it pretty much as far as you can get it, and then you're going to get it stuck on your peg. So don't go that far, which I've done before, when you're not thinking, having a little moment, getting really into the technique, and then you can't get it off, you've got to cut it off. So, you know, it's good to stay focused when you're doing this. Okay, so you can see that this is now sort of starting to get higher and higher. It's not a perfect shape at the moment. I need to keep going around because I'm not getting it perfectly round at the bottom. So it's just keep forcing this in until it is the right spherical shape. You can even pop it in there. I'm stuck. But he's, you know, it's getting pretty good, so you can keep going. Now you will end up with a lot of marks around your edges because it is hitting the corners, as you can't really avoid that. Moore's discs are beautiful, okay? They work perfectly for this kind of situation on a curved edge. So I'd probably start with the medium because some of those marks are going to be pretty deep. You know, they are the equivalent of needing to file. So use your medium, then your fine, and then your extra fine, and then you can polish, okay? So that's basically forming that up there. I'm just going to quickly shape this bottom one. And then essentially my little plan was that we could like rivet these two guys together, make a little egg cup. Oh, Claire, just getting like extra history. But I know that we're just going so much over time. I'm really, really sorry. So if it's perfect. Secretly, that's why I bought 3 sizes of eggs, because I was like, I don't know what size this is going to turn out. Something will fit or make it look really intentional. But that'd be really cute. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just quickly talk you through this rivet, and which is essentially, okay, this rivet and the spacer rivet, because we don't really have time to go through them or we'll be here for hours. But so to rivet these two together, you would be having to drill your holes the same size as your wire. If to center punch that, you just pop it onto one of these, center punch. If you've got a little bench vise that you can pop it into, that'll make it easier, okay? And then you can just drill through the two. Then when you're wanting to...
How do you drill through a dome without squashing the dome?
Just drill through it. Yeah, shouldn't squash it at all. Like if you're squashing them, it's probably that your drill bit's really blunt, so you're having to push really hard. So just swap to a sharper drill bit, and it'll just go straight through. Shouldn't have any squashing. So then when you want to go to rivet them, you're going to have to pop one in the vise, have it on like so, and then to access in here, that shallow one you could probably just access like that. That's fine. But when you flip this guy over, and you can't get inside there, which you can, but you can't, just grab another, bearing in mind this is all held with a vise, okay, so it's not as awkward as I'm making it look right now. Just pop your doming peg in and hit your peg. Or like Robin was talking about before, you know, your center punch that has a flat end, that's fine as well. Something narrow that can get inside there and hammer it. And that's how you can access those little awkward shapes, okay? So that's one. Mr. Easter egg, he's riveted, standard rivet. You could do a tube rivet if you really wanted to make your life mental, but I wouldn't bother. So that's riveting, that one. The only other one we didn't talk about was spacer rivets. So just visualize with me when we talk about this. We're going to have our 2 pieces of metal. We're going to take our top piece like we did before and drill out all of our template holes, okay? Pop it onto your bottom piece. These were the 2 that I was going to put together, okay? And drill out 1 hole. Oh, Hello, camera. Okay, drill out the hole, okay? So you've, just like you were doing a standard rivet, okay? So we've got all our top holes drilled out, one hole drilled out at the bottom. Pop a piece of wire through there, just as a placeholder, okay? Then move it to where you want it to sit, grab it with a ring clamp, drill through your second hole, and then pop a little piece of wire in as a placeholder, okay? And then you can drill out all the holes. You know, you might only have 2, but you might have 5, I don't know, whatever your design is, little spaces going on. Get all those holes drilled out, but you've got to keep those little spacer pegs in there so that we know later when we go to put that wire back in, it's all going to match up and be in the right spot. Then you're going to choose how far apart you want those guys to sit. You know, maybe you want them up really high because you're making an Easter egg ring. Maybe you want them a little bit because you're just wanting to create a little bit of height in there. Cut all your pieces of tubing to exactly the same height. So cut them all, file them all, line them all up against one another, make sure they're all perfectly the same. If they're not, file it back. They've got to be exactly the same height. Then, you know, get your bottom piece, push all your pieces of wire in, drop all your pieces of tubing over the wire, and then the awkward part is then getting that little top piece on, get all those little bits back in the corresponding holes. So you've got all of them sticking in there. Yes?
So Claire, does your tubing also have to feed through the holes? Or
No. So the hole that you are drilling in your top and bottom only fits the wire, and then your tubing will just slot over the top of your wire. So
my question is there an ideal ratio between the wall thickness and the height of tubes? Because when I tried to do this, my pieces just collapsed sideways. It was like the tubing wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, it's probably not so much the tubing wasn't strong enough as the wire was too loose. Or, so ideally you want the wire that goes inside the tube to fit flush. So, you know, you don't want any movement happening in there. And if you are doing a really tall spacer rivet, you know, if you can use thicker tube and thicker wire in there, then definitely like just do the max thickness that you can kind of, because that's going to give it more structural integrity, but also making sure that those pieces of those spacers are like exactly the same height, because if they're not, as soon as you go to, it's just going to like squash on one side. It's probably not what happened to you. It's probably that the wire's a little bit too skinny and soft, or maybe it wasn't super flush. And it is hard. Like if you make really long ones, it's way more difficult than if you make little, you know, 2 or 3 mil spacers. So something to factor in.
So like 2 mil wire would
be great. Yeah, be fantastic. Yeah. So I think the tubing that I had here fits a 1.5 wire inside it, so that'd be great for this. But if I wanted them to be like this far apart, I might be pushing it a little bit. So that's certainly something to think about. But once you've got it all lined up, then it's just a case of riveting one by one. Obviously you'll have wires hanging out all over the shop, so you just hang the wires over the edge of your steel block and just rivet one at a time going around. So I know that was super rushed. I'm so sorry we didn't quite get through those last few rivets, and we didn't get to talk too much about tabs, but if you didn't have a look at that, have a look at it, because basically it's just your design that you need to think about. It's all saw piercing, so once you can saw pierce, you can do kind of anything with it, but you know, you can fold ends up so that they create a little holder for your pin, or you could have an extra long strip that you bent around to become the bail that's for your necklace. You know, so don't feel all you can do is just super flat things with that. Yeah. And you'll just notice though, one thing that I did is I created like I made it part of the design, but these large pieces that are cut out, because otherwise you're going to end up with like a drill hole and a wire line, and it looks really naff, whereas it looks really intentional if you kind of create some different shapes in there, you know? Makes sense? So I'm going to be around for a little bit longer if you want to come and clarify any of those things. I know that was a bit rushed. So, you know, any questions, just feel free to come up and ask, and maybe we'll have to do a little spacer and other rivet thing later on. Yeah, and please have an Easter egg. Have a chocolate.
Thank you. That was
excellent. Thank you. That's okay. Sorry about that. Sorry, I went so overtime.
I have, for example,
Oh, lovely. Yes.
that one. I would like to know, because I understand you cannot just hammer it because you have the sphere in the center, which I think is a silver.
This guy?
I think it's hollow silver.
I think it's a pearl.
You think really is?
Yeah. I'm sure that's a pearl.
So you could not really hammer that. So how would you
Well,
go about it? You want to have something like that?
probably part of the design of this is that they've used a very thick and rigid silver shank. So, yeah, they have riveted that in there, and I'm sure that it would be a pearl, which would have a little bit, but you wouldn't want to hammer too hard because the nacre would chip off. So I would say it's a combination of the fact that they've used a really rigid silver. This could even be cast, so that it's really, that silver is absorbing most of the bang, 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 not that. And they're probably literally being, that would definitely be annealed, the rivet wire, and they're just going to be like tap, 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 so gentle, because they don't want to go bang and then the nacre goes or something. But yeah, that's certainly possible. It's just that you have to be a little bit more careful and a few more design considerations with it. Yeah.
Because I was always thinking, I also heard that there was a device, if you have a rivet and you have a ball on the one side and you want to create something similar on the other side, but you cannot solder it because you already have a stone or a bead or a pearl or something in the center of it, like here.
Yeah.
So how would you, someone told me that there's a device which allows you to cut around the wire a little bit and then thicken the end. I have no idea, but you know, it was just explained to me, but no one has ever shown it.
I'm trying to like understand where.
Well, if you need you have like a ball on the one side,
yes,
and you want to put two pieces together like this with something in the center,
yes,
and you have a ball already. You push the wire through,
yes,
have the bead or whatever you use, and then you have a plain wire poking out here. But you would like to create a counterpart that looks similar to the...
Like have a ball on the other side too.
Yes, but you cannot solder it or rig it up and soften it up or anything. What would you do? Forget about the project.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to get really complicated, you could like tap and die. So you could make a little ball and drill into it, use the tap and die to create an internal thread, and then put an external thread on the line, screw it on as a possibility. Otherwise, I don't know, like there could be something that like a cool tool that I don't know about, or I'm just missing it, but I can't.
CNC mill is the only thing I can think of.
What is that?
A CNC mill, very expensive, complicated, computer-driven piece of machine.
But is this like, as in they're starting with a larger blank and then from
they carve it down.
Yeah.
It's very technical, big machine.
But then how are they getting it inside the ring?
So what they do is they computer. So basically they'd start off with a small rod. And then they would, it's like wood turn, and so they would turn it to make a spear, cut it off, then they would basically do like a tap and die. So it's very,
it's still really tap and die.
Yeah, very wasteful because it's a negative process.
There's probably some really cool stuff that you could do with like 3D printing.
I was going to say
it to be like a silver ball that have those, but
the problem with 3D printing is they can't get the finest, like 1 mil in metal is as fine as they can go with the affordable 3D printing processes. So. And Claire, I had a question on that.
That's okay. On which, sorry?
On that matter.
Oh, yeah.
When they have the rivets and they've got the ball ends and then they come on.
Yeah, I'm going to see Andrew for a second.
The ball end on the other way. Now, what people say is that they come in with like an oxyacetylene torch and they hit that hot and very quick.
And ball it.
and ball it.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
wouldn't
only-
risk it if that was
Was-
not metal.
Yeah.
If that was metal, then yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. But
Pardon?
I mean, yeah, like yeah.
That's the
but-
only way you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm not good enough to do that.
Yeah, I was just.
So I'm not saying you couldn't do it. I'm just saying I wouldn't.
No,
do it.
I wouldn't do it either, but I keep seeing it. I'm like, how the hell do they do that?
But with like a little pearl or something like that, or with something.
Like this.
The other thing it could be is that it's not that it's like two pins coming in, like if it's a pearl. It's like a sorry, I'm just taking that for
And
yeah,
so they've
and they've
got
got two pins and they're glued in.
glued
like
in
a setting
each way.
Yeah, could be that too.
That's
If it's spinning, it's not going to be that, but if it's fixed, it's probably that.
Well, it could be spinning if they've got sufficient room on each side.
Yeah, but they're gluing that. So unless it's like a tension, unless if they're going to do it with tension, maybe.
Yeah.
If they're doing it by gluing it, like they're going to do
Yeah,
it with
the pearl won't spin, but if the whole assembly.
Oh, I see, the whole assembly. Yes, yeah,
That's,
maybe.
that's one way to do it. But yeah, I keep seeing them with these bales, you know, and they've got the
into the light.
things outside, and I'm thinking the only way they can do that is just straight metal
And put that on the other side.
Yeah,
You have
I'm just kind of thinking
wires.
and then just do it, like, think about the distance. Like if you can have a longer piece of wire with a smaller thing that you could like stick over here and have that like in water or something like that. And then zap the other end. Like it's going to be a little bit less risky than just like a big pearl that's like doesn't have a lot of space to go, and you're going to zap the other end. But I mean, it's probably just practice and using like the right size tip on your little torch and.
And it's doing
I don't have
the impact's doing all the work.
Oh, okay.
To actually put
But I
it
was
in
just
there.
thinking that. I was thinking, how the hell do they do the bales like that? And when I read about it, they just said, yeah, they just come in hot, fast.
I'm using the sand or the garnet one.
But
One of the good ways to make any demos is the fact
yeah, and I just think the guns ever so slightly coarser. And I'm just used to those. I feel like that's it's pure, like when they didn't have them, I used garnet. That's fine.
I had the garnet.
Yeah. And is it the garnet that has like the really soft paper back? I bought one that didn't have it, and I was like, damn it, this is the worst. It just disappears into nothing. Thank you. See you later.
No, that was good.
Yeah, where'd you
Awesome. Have an Easter egg.
Are they just plain
Yeah,
chocolate?
gonna be good.
Are they chocolate?
They're just plain chocolate. Yes.
Thanks for that.
No, what they have
Yeah.
had,
Yeah.
the silly in the grocery industry,
Oh yeah.
what they used to have was copper nails.
Yeah.
Square
The-
tank, the shank,
Oh yeah.
and they drive it through the timber.
Oh, that's awesome because the timber can kind of hold that. Yeah.
They had little rivets,
Yeah.
not rivets, washers, with
Yeah.
a tiny hole in it,
Yeah.
and you had like a tube punch.
Yeah.
You put it over the top and hit it down, and you take the washer down to the timber.
Cool.
Then you trim it off.
Yeah.
Then you have like the dappling block,
Yeah.
but a punch with a
Yeah.
round, with a concave round head in it.
Yeah.
And you just punch it, and you roll it as you go around, and you finish up with a perfect round head for your rivet.
That's cool.
So
That's awesome.
you know, some of these things you were doing, if you
Yeah.
had a little punch,
You could just kind of achieve the same
you
thing.
get
Yeah,
very
yeah.
quickly,
That's
and
awesome.
it'll give you quite a different result.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. So,
And you do things that you can't do because to create that effect, you'd have to either put a lump of silver on the end of the ball, the sphere, and you can create that sphere finish.
yeah. Oh, I like it.
But you can do it with your bird, make them up,
Yeah.
get someone to buy some metal rod, depending on the hardness of the stuff you do, and just concave out, and that allows you to operate in a tiny space.
Yes, and just get into that little itty bitty spot. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Anyway,
Oh, I like it. Thank you. It's good. I love these classes because people always have these like awesome ideas. You're like, oh, I'm going to steal that. That's awesome. That's going to work well.
Trialed it a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, Rob. Shoving Easter eggs into my face.
Thank you very much. I was just going to ask how you tell which side is the...
Now, it's a bit hard with the fine ones, but there's a sort of slightly abrasive and then a very smooth plasticky side.
Okay.
So it's, I don't know if you can just feel it's almost like it's matte as
right.
opposed to shiny.
Okay.
But if you get a coarser one, these are, I feel like these are all super fine. None of them are actually, yeah, there's a fine one, feel that. Yeah,
That's
so
very
it's much more obvious the coarser that you go.
Yeah.
It's just those extra fine ones. You're like, I always look at them, I'm like, shit, which side is this?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're great. Like I just,
They are.
they're good.
Like, what is this secret?
Yeah. It will change your life. So I think, I don't know if they're like $10 for one of these, and then I just get like one of each grit, a couple of little things. It's like the best $50 you ever spend in your life.
Yeah.
So
much time saved. And I was going to ask about the rivet in the doming. So I got
sorry,
back,
I really rushed through that.
I got back when you had one on the end and then one on top.
Yes.
But I didn't hear whether or not you'd started the head of the rivet before you put it through.
I hadn't, but you could. You certainly could, and it would probably make your life easier. So you know, if you were like, the chance of that fall. Let's say I'm just getting all ahead of myself.
Yeah.
If it was like a little bit loose, you like if you're putting that rivet in, it's just going to fall out. Yeah. It might be good to just pre-form that rivet head. If you can just, I'm pretty lazy. I always want to like do things the easiest way. So if you drill that hole right and the wire's just sticking in there nice and firm, I wouldn't. Worry.
And then you just rivet both ends at the one.
I still flip them. I still continually flip them because you will kind of hit one with a little bit more force than the other, and then one of them is because we don't have two the same size and there's different weights. So just to ensure that I'm being as even as possible and not getting like a favouring effect on either side, I would still keep flipping it. But you know, if you had
you can do both ends at once.
That's brilliant. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah, if it was like a perfect world, like if it was something that was in a factory, they would just have a machine where they are both the same size and the same force is pressuring, and then that would work. But because we are human and we're just like, oh, I'm using this size one and that size one at way different amounts, and
that makes a lot
hit
of
on
sense.
a funny angle sometimes. That's why I'm just always flipping it around to kind of correct those human.
I'm excited about that. I'm keen to go
good.
try it.
Yeah, rivet it up.
This one, the dome one, I've never.
Yeah, I think that can look really beautiful, and that's like that. I didn't polish him, so it's so beautiful when you just whip that under like some final polish. And bing, it looks beautiful. So
gorgeous.
Yeah. Yep.
Can't wait to try that. Thank you.
Would you use this same system for making hinged earrings and things like that?
Like with using tube and hinging it?
No, with solid wire, solid sterling silver wire. Like that rather than sterling silver.
Yeah.
And you've got your earring, right, and you've got your slot in there and your other one that fits in it. You'd use the same sort of system as that, only you wouldn't make it go tight, would you, so it'd move.
Yeah, when you're saying, I'm just trying to work out with the hinge. When you're saying the slot, like what are the elements that you're using to contain that in the earring for the hinge?
What it is, I have the hinge. That's one part of your earring.
It's got sheet metal, maybe.
No. Say half round sterling silver.
Yeah. Okay.
With a slot in it.
Yeah.
And then you fold the other one down to fit into it. Put your hole through it. And then you put that through, and you'd use the same sort of system, but you wouldn't make it go up.
Yeah, and if you're wanting to do it so that it's not going to be as tight, a really good little thing is if you can get like the cardboard off the cereal box and put like one or, depending how loose you want it, put 1 or 2 layers of that like in between the different segments that you're doing and rivet it. So then you get this really nice firm package, it's a nice firm rivet, but then you tear the cardboard out and then that creates some of the gap in there because it's hard to like not rivet firmly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that would go the same for the piece that goes through your ear and you bend down. It'd be the same, you know what I mean? Like you flatten that bit of wire out, you drill a little hole through there, put your wire through.
I'm just trying to like imagine that the bit that's going through your ear, are you saying it's going through your ear and then it's having a rivet at one end?
So you've made your earring like that, right?
Like a circle earring?
Yeah, and you've got it hinged here.
Yes.
But it stops here, and it stops there, and the
they
piece
snap
that goes through there,
you
rivet that, and come through your ear.
Oh yes, sorry, I see what you're saying. Yes, yeah, you could do that. So say the piece that's coming around here, carve like a notch into it, put your earring white in that you've maybe flattened the end of it so that it's flat, with a hole drill, put it in, rivet. Yes, that would work perfectly, that'd be great. And again, yeah, it's just that you're doing your super gentle riveting, you're probably not going to flip-flop and do that flat hammer at the end to make it.